If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 141, The Gospel of the Sky, 2 in 1 chapter. Sure enough, being involved in such significant events inevitably led to the formation of new character specialties. Lumen's white dress revealed her snow-white back, and the fluttering straps attached to the back of her scarf fluttered in the cool night breeze, occasionally brushing against Nolan's arm. As he listened to Lumen and Paimon chatting, Nolan continued to look at his character panel with anticipation. On that day, you and the Princess of Condemnation who rules the Evernight Kingdom accepted a commission from future Knight Ellen to venture into the wilderness to embark on a new adventure. Soon after, you managed to help the gathering team recover the supplies stolen by monsters and unexpectedly encountered the Blue Spirit. Guided by the Blue Spirit, you arrived at an unnamed mountain cave, where you obtained treasures but also encountered danger. Without a doubt, you encountered the world's top-tier magical dragon, the Storm Terror, for the first time. The storm it brought trapped you in the cave. You defeated many wild beasts and monsters, including 3 evil mages from the abyss. After the storm passed, you returned to Mondstadt city safely. Encountering your friend who was being dragged to learn the wind glider, where you encountered the Storm Terror for the second time. It attacked this free city, but fortunately, with the presence of the outsider from another world, her purification power successfully drove it away. Subsequently, you were invited to the Knights of Favonius headquarters and entrusted by the acting Grand Master to solve the source of the wind disaster at the abandoned Four Winds temples. Upon your successful return, you were knighted as an honorary knight. While continuing to search for ways to resolve the crisis, you were misled by the unreliable Anmo Archon into stealing Mondstadt's treasure, the Holy Lyre to Himmel. The process was fraught with twists and turns, but in the end, you successfully persuaded the acting Grand Master to provide assistance. With the help of the acting Grand Master and the Dark Knight hero, you successfully repaired the Holy Lyre to Himmel and summoned the Storm Terror. After a fierce battle, you successfully cleared the poisonous thorns that had troubled the Storm Terror for many years, perfectly saving it. This has been an incredible adventure. The history you've experienced and created will be remembered, and a character specialty is taking shape. Please wait a moment. It's happening, it's happening. Memories of the recent events automatically surfaced. The history created by Nolan's participation began to converge around him. Once the history converged, it couldn't be changed by any means. Because that history had already anchored itself to him, turning into a power called character specialties. As long as he didn't perish and his specialties remained, the past anchored to him couldn't be altered. It was like adding an extra layer of protection named Nolan all around him. It does have its uses. After all, no one knows he's the anchor of this history. Who would randomly think of him in this context? You've gained a new character specialty, Gospel of the Sky. Oh boy, it finally appeared. Nolan tapped on the introduction of the effects of this character specialty with some anticipation. Gospel of the Sky, from the power granted by the adventures of Saving Storm Terror, Valen, this specialty allows the wielder to manipulate Anmo elemental power even without the vision. Holy moly! Nolan almost shouted out as he looked at the short description. Phew, luckily, he was a calm and collected person. Elemental power, hey? Elemental power. Previously, he had gone through many complicated processes in order to obtain the means to attack with elemental power. Finding Wagner at the blacksmith shop to make elemental arrows, going to the alchemy table, and asking Sucrose to make elemental potions. He only used one bottle before the rest were shattered. There was also the recently acquired Pyro Elemental Delusion. All of these were just external items. Once they were used up or broken, they were gone. But having control over one's own power was more reassuring. Thinking about this, Nolan finally couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth and clench his fist. Lumen, wearing over-the-knee high-heeled boots, her skirt hiding her snow-white thighs, cocked her waist slightly, wearing a puzzled expression, and stared at him, saying, "You've been acting strange since earlier. It's a bit suspicious." Paimon rubbed her chin with her palm, doubt evident in her starry eyes, as she continued, "I mean, what's up with you?" Nolan calmed his emotions and, after a moment of contemplation, spoke openly, I seem to have found that I can manipulate Anmo elements, for some reason. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden unless he didn't even use wind elemental power in the future, which was obviously impossible. What? Paimon, wearing her crown, exclaimed, covering her mouth. Even Lumen showed a surprised expression. Could it be that you've obtained a vision? Paimon asked in amazement for a moment before expressing some confusion, her gaze also showing a hint of disbelief, gesturing for him to try it out. After all, she only knew that Nolan had a delusion that could produce fire. That's not it. Nolan shook his head, then raised his palm, attempting to conjure a wind bullet. However, he found that the green wind elemental energy only spun once in his palm before dissipating. Obviously, his proficiency was lacking, and he needed more practice. His current state was actually similar to an ordinary person who had just obtained a vision. It takes time to smoothly control elemental power. It's actually true. Could it be that you also? Paimon widened her eyes, almost blurting out Lumen's secret origin, then hurriedly covered her mouth. Me too. Nolan pretended to be puzzled and casually asked, though he wanted to ignore what Paimon said. But she had gone overboard with her reaction. No, it's nothing, don't worry about it. Paimon hastily waved her hand, almost like when they were hiding from the rain in the cave, and nearly slipped up again. Lumen looked helplessly at Paimon, wondering if saying that made Nolan more suspicious. Paimon wants to ask, are you also like me, from outside this world, with the ability to control elemental power by coming into contact with a deity/god? Lumen lowered her arm, clad in a white long-sleeved glove, and after a moment of contemplation, she asked openly. She didn't mention it earlier because she didn't want to attract trouble, but after spending so much time together, she understood that Nolan was a friend worth getting to know. So, revealing this small matter wasn't a big problem. At the same time, Lumen was also puzzled. She knew that ordinary people on Teyvat needed to possess a vision, an external magical organ, to control elemental power. But now, she encountered someone besides herself who could control elemental power without bypassing the vision. If it weren't for those with similar experiences, they might only think Nolan was someone with a special physique in Teyvat. But for Lumen, it added another thought, someone else from outside the world, just like me. Nolan didn't expect Lumen to be so straightforward. He now had decent strength and had dispelled the confusion and lack of confidence he had when he first crossed over. As long as malicious people didn't find out, telling Lumen and Paimon wasn't a problem. So Nolan nodded and said, actually, I'm not from Teyvat. I'm just an ordinary person from a world with more advanced science. As for why I'm here, I don't understand either. At first, I was very unfamiliar with this place and kept this matter hidden. Fortunately, my talent in various martial arts aspects is good, which has led to my growth to the level I am at today. Nolan showed a helpless expression and briefly explained. As for abilities like gaining Adventure EXP from the character panel, it was attributed to his own talents. He still wanted to keep some secrets. Wow, it's actually true. Paimon covered her head, surprised for a moment, and then felt that it wasn't that strange after all. After all, she had been following a visitor from another world all along, so having one more wasn't that difficult to accept. Hehe, tell me what delicious things your world has. She quickly put this matter aside, slightly moving her hands and feet in midair, saying with some anticipation. Lumen folded her hands across her chest, giving Paimon a disdainful look. I'm not a master chef. I only know how to make some home-cooked dishes. I can't make any gourmet food. Nolan scratched his head, a smile spreading across his face. Then he continued, speaking of which, Lumen, you're also from another world, right? Did you also suddenly come here? Since he now knew that Lumen also came from outside the world, it wouldn't be right not to show curiosity. No, my brother and I came together, but in the end, he was taken away by an unknown god, and I lost my power too. Lumen's fair face showed a hint of melancholy, but she still briefly recounted her experience. I see. What Lumen said was the same as what Nolan had known. He didn't pursue further on this matter rationally, but instead turned to Lumen and asked, Lumen, since I inexplicably gained the power of the wind element, but I'm not very proficient in it, could you teach me when you have time? Lumen now also controlled the wind element, and they lived in the same house, so it was convenient to ask for advice. Of course, that's no problem. Lumen patted her snowy white chest, indicating that it was okay. Paimon stood with her hands on her hips, lifting her chin, then looked at Nolan and said, you have to pay a fee for this, traveler can't teach you for free. How about using it to offset the rent and meal expenses? Paimon, you're quite thoughtful. Let's go with what you said then. Nolan endured a smile and said. Valberry Street, an exquisite two-story building. After walking for a long time, the three finally returned home. Lumen and Paimon went to heat water for a bath, as they would be busy for a while. Nolan, on the other hand, lay down on the light blue soft sofa for a while. In addition to gaining a new character specialty from the Storm Terror incident, he also obtained many Adventure EXP from the monsters defeated by everyone. Adventure EXP, 9555. The panel displayed more than 9,000, which could be used to raise several levels and enhance his strength without any problem. Adventure EXP, 8400. LV.27, 0/2700. LV.30, 0/3000. Raising 3 levels at once, a huge and warm flow appeared in his body, gradually alleviating all the fatigue and muscle soreness. Although there were no visible changes on the surface, he could clearly feel that his overall physical fitness had improved. It was a pity that reaching level 30 wasn't a second breakthrough, that would happen at level 40, so there was no appearance of the 3-choice racial specialization. Name, Nolan Walker. Level, LV.30, 0/3000. Race, Human. Title, Honorary Knight. Innate Talent, Entangling Affection. Skills, Favonius Hunter's Archery LV.10, Advanced Stability, Shadowless and Silent, Favonius Royal Swordsmanship LV.10, Flickering Candlelight, Boundary of Still Wind, Stealth Assassination LV.4, 0/400, Marital Arts LV.2, 0/200, Sin Purging Arrow LV.1, 1/100, Rhine One-Handed Swordsmanship LV.1, 1/100. Specialties, Descender, Maiden Savior, Monster Slayer, Abundant Life, Gospel of the Sky. Adventure EXP, 1155. Looking at the remaining more than 1,000 Adventure EXP on the panel, it wasn't enough to level up. If you use it to upgrade your skills, you won't be able to level up to max level at once, so you can gain extraordinary characteristics, so it's better to save it for when you have enough Adventure EXP, and then upgrade one of the archery or swordsmanship skills to max level. He remembered that in the character panel, a regular skill could gain 3 or more extraordinary characteristics, which might then be promoted to a more powerful extraordinary skill. This extraordinary skill should correspond to the secret arts in the continent of Teyvat. Most of the skills Nolan was learning now were ordinary level skills, and only when they reached full level would they have extraordinary characteristics. As for the secret arts, it meant that it was already an extraordinary skill in itself, with its own extraordinary characteristics, just like his stealth assassination skill. Reaching max level wouldn't mean gaining extraordinary characteristics, instead, it would transform into something even stronger on its original basis. How much stronger it would become would only be clear when he reached that level. Not long after, Lumen finished bathing and changed into a white sleeveless top, stepping out of the bath, using a towel to dry her damp golden hair while her fair hands glistened with moisture. She wore white shorts with frills at the hem, and her snow-white skin exposed by her legs looked dewy. Her ember eyes looked at Nolan on the sofa, and her soft lips parted slightly as she smiled and said, "After dinner, let's start teaching you how to use the power of the wind element. I'll teach you some techniques to control the wind element proficiently. I just thought of this, and it's very useful." "Okay, there's nothing else to do after dinner anyway." Nolan nodded with some anticipation. Next, little Paimon also finished bathing and came out. Nolan saw that it was almost time and went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The meat and vegetables were all freshly bought when they came back earlier, otherwise, they wouldn't use the power of ice to prevent the food from spoiling. Soon, a sumptuous dinner was ready, quickly devoured by the hungry trio. After clearing the table, Lumen took a seat on the sofa, her softness leaving an indent in the plush cushions as the white scourge hugged her rear. Nolan and Paimon sat beside her, listening to her explanation. To quickly master the power of the wind element, it's all about practice. But for beginners in contact with elemental power, guiding the scarce wind elemental power from the surrounding space can be very energy-consuming. Lumen paused and glanced at Nolan, asking him with her eyes if he understood. "Yeah, I got it." Nolan nodded. What Lumen said could probably be easily understood even by ordinary people. "So, I thought of a simple technique, which is for me to condense a denser mass of wind elemental power first, and then I directly guide the wind elemental power in my hand. This way, it will be much easier." Lumen raised her white hand, and a ball of cyan-colored wind element slowly rotated in her palm. Chapter 142, Brave Heart, 2 in 1 chapter. "So, you mean artificially creating an environment with a higher concentration of elemental power for me to practice in? Nolan said thoughtfully. That's easy to understand. Let's say there are 70 small balls of different elemental powers in front of Nolan. There are 10 of each of the 7 elemental powers, all mixed together. Now, Nolan needs to pick out the wind element ball. As a beginner, it might take a bit longer, and it's normal not to grasp it immediately. And this method also consumes more energy. What Lumen did was to pick out the 10 wind element balls first, and directly present them to Nolan, like feeding him. Perhaps the analogy isn't entirely accurate, but understanding the gist is enough. Obviously, practicing in an environment with a high concentration of elements would make it much easier for Nolan. I see, the clever Paimon understands too. Paimon, wearing a small short-sleeved shirt, nodded and then took a bite of the apple in her hand, followed by a crisp chewing sound. Yeah, that's it. So, why don't you give it a try now? Lumen's fair right foot stretched out from her slipper, slightly pulling it back, pressing her ankle against the left leg, nestled in the gap between the soft couch. Sure, no problem. Nolan nodded, bringing both hands close to the swirling mass of wind elemental power floating above Lumen's fair palms. Relying on his intuition, he activated his character specialization, Gospel of the Sky, attempting to slowly guide the wind elemental power in front of him into his own hands. The spinning mass of wind elemental in Lumen's hand stalled slightly. Then, 2 small tentacles were drawn to Nolan's hands. As expected, with Lumen's assistance, it was much simpler than guiding it himself. Wow, it moved, it really moved. Nolan, you're quite talented, Paimon exclaimed, swallowing the chewed-up fruit and then puzzledly asked, hey, why did it retreat? As Paimon said, just when Nolan thought he was about to succeed. The wind elemental power he had drawn out retracted again. It seems that even in an environment with a high concentration of elements, he needs to practice several times. How does it feel? Lumen used her left hand to tidy up her hair, which hadn't completely dried yet. It's indeed much easier, but there also seems to be an additional resistance to compete with you for control of the wind element. Nolan thought for a moment, summarizing his feelings and said. My resistance. Lumen pursed her lips, lightly nodded her fair chin in understanding, and continued, this time, I'll release control of the wind elemental power. Seize the opportunity to guide them when they start to dissipate. Nolan nodded softly, his palms still cradling the swirling mass of wind elemental power. With a thought, Lumen released her control over the wind elemental power, causing it to start dissipating. Nolan seized the opportunity to guide them again. The cyan-colored wind elemental seemed to gain some kind of force to maintain its cohesion between his palms, slowly rotating between them. It seems like it worked. Oh, it's dissipating again. Can't these wind elemental powers behave? Once again, Paimon was disappointed when she thought Nolan was going to succeed. It's okay, I feel like I've found the knack, Lumen, let's try this method a few more times. Nolan wasn't as crestfallen as Paimon, he did manage to control the wind elemental power just now, albeit not for long. As long as he familiarizes himself a few more times, he believes he'll get the hang of it soon. After a long time passed, Lumen and Paimon kept accompanying Nolan to practice controlling the wind element like this. They yawned, feeling a bit tired. On the other hand, Nolan, with his abundant life specialty, didn't seem to feel sleepy. Nolan didn't pay attention to how many times he practiced, anyway, he looked at Lumen's hand that was condensing the wind element, and it looked like she couldn't even lift it up. Her head bobbed, as if she could fall asleep at any moment. Nolan watched the unstable wind element gathered in her hands, seeming like it would dissipate at any moment. Instead of waiting for Lumen to release her control over the wind element, he tried to guide it directly. This time, the resistance was minimal, and the rotating wind element easily came to Nolan's hands. 1 second, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes. Few finally succeeded. Nolan exclaimed in surprise. He felt like he could freely control this mass of wind elementals now. After playing around for a while, he released his control over the wind elementals on his hands. When it completely dissipated, Nolan tried to guide the elementals without Lumen's assistance. A faint breeze rotated in his palms. After several familiarizations with guiding the wind elements, he had successfully mastered this technique. Ah, did it work? If it doesn't work again, I'm going to fall asleep. Paimon, lying on the couch with Lumen's soft thighs as a pillow, rubbed her sleepy eyes. Looks like you're learning well, that's all for today, just practice for a few more days and you should be able to apply it in a real battle. Lumen said, relieved to see Nolan finally succeed. She raised her hands, stretching lazily, and the white short-sleeved top was lifted slightly, revealing her snow-white belly. The next morning, after Nolan and the others finished breakfast, they came to the Knights HQ and greeted the Knights of Favonius standing guard at the entrance, and entered the acting Grand Master's office. Both honorable knights, and Paimon, you're here. Jean, wearing the Knight Order uniform, smiled. This time she didn't sit on the chairs in the office area near the window. Instead, somewhat unexpectedly, she sat on the right side of the square-long table, with a cup of steaming hot tea in front of her. The Scout Knight with a red bunny ear knot on her head, also sat next to her. Good morning, Grand Master Jean, Amber's here too. Paimon greeted Jean first, then looked at Amber with some surprise. Hehe, why wouldn't I be here as a Knight of Favonius? Nolan, Lumen, come over and have some tea. Amber's white face revealed a smile as she stood up and picked up the ceramic teapot on the tablet and poured a cup of black tea for everyone. Wow, it smells so warm and nice. Paimon didn't sit down on the chair like Nolan and the others did. Instead, she floated in midair, holding the teacup and sniffing it near her nose. Jean picked up the white teacup and put it to her soft lips and took a sip. This is a souvenir given to me by the Tianquan of Liao when she came to Mondstadt to discuss business cooperation. It seems to be a tea called Dyed Dragon Snow, produced on a tea tree unique to Liao. According to them, this special tea tree grows differently from others, only producing tender buds and leaves in large quantities during the winter season. They need to be nourished by snow and cold, and only when it's great snow season can they be picked to have a special tea fragrance, which is extremely rare and therefore precious. Great snow? Is it a day with heavy snowfall? Lumen looked at the reflection of her face in the red liquid in the teacup, a bit puzzled. Great snow doesn't refer to snowy weather, it's a solar term in the calendar of Liao, a fixed day. Amber explained. I see. Lumen and Paimon both nodded. Hehe, Nolan, as someone from Liao, you should know about it, right? Amber looked at the young adventurer and asked. Nolan paused with the teacup in hand. He understood the concept of solar terms, but tea trees were something the game hadn't mentioned. How would he know? Anyways, he is not really from Liao, it's just he looks like one for obvious reasons. When he first crossed over, he didn't tell Amber the truth due to various considerations. It had always made him feel a bit guilty about not being honest with her. Now was a good opportunity to come clean. After all, continuing like this would eventually lead to exposure, and it wouldn't be good to lose Amber's affection. Actually, Amber, I'm not from Liao, Nolan replied after a moment of silence. Hey. Amber nodded twice as if to say she was listening, then widened her eyes in realization. Cough, actually, it's like this. Nolan patiently explained his situation of coming from another world to both Amber and Grand Master Jean. At the time, to avoid being misunderstood by you, I said I was from Liao. After all, if someone suddenly said they were from another world, anyone would find it suspicious, right? I see. I can't believe it. If it weren't for knowing you for so long and knowing you're not someone who likes to joke around, I would have thought you were joking, Amber said somewhat surprised. That explains it. You seemed like an ordinary person with mediocre martial skills before. It's understandable that you concealed your bizarre origins, Jean nodded thoughtfully, leaning back against the chair. Well, since there's a reason for it, I won't hold it against you for deceiving me. Amber's red bunny ear hair knot wiggled as her soft lips curved up slightly in a smile. Rather, I'm glad you told me your secret. It means I'm still worthy of your trust as a friend. Amber has developed good feelings towards you, obtain 300 affection points. Current affection level LV.4, 350/400. Amber has a point. As an honorable knight, the Knight Order will always be your strong support. Jean folded her hands across her chest, showing a faint smile. Jean has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 180 affection points. Current affection level LV.5, 10/500. Due to their already high levels of affection, even though Amber and Grand Master Jean heard something unexpected, they showed understanding towards Nolan. This made him feel somewhat relieved. That. Grand Master Jean, Amber, actually I am too. At this moment, Lumen, with white flowers in her golden hair, looked embarrassed as she spoke up. Jean and Amber's faces showed helplessness. When did visitors from another world become so common? Not only did they appear in Mondstadt, but they also became honorary knights of the Knights of Favonius at the same time. After thoroughly understanding the situation between Nolan and Lumen, Jean sighed and nodded. Your situation is indeed a bit unexpected, and it does make sense for you to conceal it. Too many people knowing about it would inevitably lead to trouble, so we won't announce that you two honorable knights are visitors from another world. Anyway, let's put that aside for now. You're here to claim the artifacts set rewards I promised yesterday, right? Yes, that's right. Nolan and Lumen nodded slightly. I have 2 sets of artifacts here. Because of their similar powers, even in their initial state, the resonance effect of the set can provide a considerable boost in power to the bearer. Jean stood up and took out 2 sets of golden-hued artifacts from her vision, placing them in front of the 2. Wow, they're so beautiful. Paimon admired their color, reminiscent of round Mora coins. They're called Brave Hearts. They were found in a new secret realm discovered by the Knights of Favonius when we explored it together, Amber said with a slight smile on her fair face. I see. Well, then we won't be polite and accept them. Nolan nodded. He remembered that in the game, the 2-piece set of Braveheart increased attack power, plus 18%, while the 4-piece set boosted damage against high health targets, increases DMG by 30% against opponents with more than 50% HP. Overall, it was quite good. Artifacts are as mysterious as the existence of treasure chests, and their nature is precipitated by the history of a long time, with magical power. So, the way to equip them was also quite mystical. Anyone who touched them with their hands could choose to integrate them into their bodies as energy. Once successfully carried, removing them was as simple as a thought, very straightforward. With the Knights of Favonius reward in hand, Nolan and his companions prepared to leave. According to their plan before leaving, the 3 of them would go to the Adventurers Guild to pick up quests after collecting their rewards from the Knights of Favonius. Although Lumen hadn't asked Venti if he knew the unknown god who kidnapped her brother, she probably knew it wasn't the mischievous and Mo Archon. So, she would soon embark on the next adventure of her journey. But before that, she needed to earn enough Mora and buy some essential supplies in Mondstadt. After all, a trip to Liu, the closest neighboring nation to Mondstadt, would take about a month for a merchant caravan hauling goods by wagon. She and Paimon couldn't continue living off the land by hunting forever. At the very least, they needed to bring enough food and clean water. Oh, wait a minute. Nolan, traveler, do you have time now? Amber called out to Nolan and his companions. Amber, what's up? Paimon asked, tilting her head in confusion. Later on I'm going to post your brother's missing person notice. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to clean up some of the debris that was blown onto the walls and roofs of the buildings due to the windstorm. Are you guys free to join me? Amber said with deliberation. Of course. Lumen nodded heavily, taking on a commission to earn Mora could come later, but finding her brother would have to be taken seriously first. Since that's the case, I'll help too, Nolan naturally wouldn't refuse. Count me in too. Paimon raised a hand, indicating her willingness to join. Great, let's start by checking the rooftop of the Knights of Favonius building. We'll see if anything has been blown up there. Amber smiled gently. Next, everyone bid farewell to Master Jean, left the acting Grand Master's office, and followed Amber to the stairs leading to the upper floor behind the hall. 2 girls, wearing knee-high white boots, swayed their skirts as they walked up the stairs, the sound of their heels tapping against the ground crisp and clear. Chapter 143, Lighting Up the Teleport Waypoint, 2 in 1 chapter. Amber, what's on the 2nd floor of the Knights of Favonius headquarters? As they continued walking up the stairs, passing what seemed like an unremarkable 2nd floor, Nolan asked curiously. In the game, there was an invisible wall here that players couldn't pass through, so it naturally sparked his curiosity. He was no exception. It's a place for storing some files and information and providing a temporary resting place for everyone after work. Nothing special. Her deep brown hair flowed along the gentle curve of her back as Amber looked ahead, her fair profile facing Nolan with a smile. Oh, I see. Nolan nodded. As expected, as he had anticipated, the reason players couldn't access this area in the game was probably just because the development team hadn't bothered to do internal modeling. Soon after, they arrived at the rooftop of the Knights of Favonius headquarters. Pushing open the wooden door, they saw the same greyish-white stone floor. They easily spotted the debris blown onto the rooftop by the wind disaster, such as leaves and newspapers. Some were hanging on the brick railing, while others were lodged in the tiles outside the railing. Ah, look, there's indeed a lot of debris. We'll have to clean them up. Amber sighed a little. After cleaning up, we'll fly down to the area near the windmill and post a missing person notice there. After saying that, Amber led everyone to collect the debris while preparing to burn them to ashes with pyro-elemental energy, as they were mostly useless. At the same time, Paimon also asked Amber with some confusion. If we post it on the windmill, won't it be seen by fewer people due to the high location? After all, for a missing person notice to be effective, someone had to see it. Otherwise, it would be a waste of effort. Amber shook her head, the rabbit ear knots in her hair swaying as she parted her thin red lips and said. A lot of young citizens go to a few of the big windmills in Mondstadt city to enjoy the view, especially some affectionate lovers. So, posting it there won't seem secluded, and someone is bound to notice it. I see. What Amber said makes sense. Let's hurry up and finish cleaning up the stuff and fly over to post the missing person notice. Paimon waved her little fist in anticipation. Yeah, let's do that. Amber squatted in front of the pile of useless debris, her thigh-high white boots creasing slightly at the knees. She extended her right hand to ignite the debris with pyro-elemental energy, and suddenly remembered something. Oh, by the way, speaking of flying, Lumen, Nolan, it seems like neither of you have a flying license yet. A flying license? What's that? Before the two could answer, Paimon, looking perplexed, asked first, while Lumen looked at her with ember-colored eyes. Nolan, however, had some understanding of this. The name itself is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to fly legally in Mondstadt, you must obtain a flying license. Amber looked at the flickering flames in front of her, a slight smile appearing on her fair face. So, is Amber planning to give us a flying license? Lumen smiled, her fair fingers brushing the golden tips of her hair that cascaded down her face. How could that be? The Knights of Favonius uphold principles. After the flames died out, Amber clapped her hands and stood up. To obtain a flying license, one must pass an exam and then it will be issued by the Knights of Favonius. She paused for a moment before continuing, Today, as part of your task to clean up the city rooftop debris and post missing person notices, I'll act as your examiner to oversee the exam. After all, as honorary knights, it wouldn't be proper for you to fly around the city without a license, would it? Exam is a word I often heard when I was studying and going to school back in my world. Nolan scratched his head, feeling annoyed to encounter this troublesome word even after crossing over. Yeah, exams sound troublesome indeed, but if Amber is supervising as the examiner, then maybe. Paimon blinked her starry eyes, looking at the enthusiastic scout knight with anticipation. Nolan couldn't help but smile slightly at Paimon's expression, thinking that little Paimon really had a knack for wit, although the upright scout knight would certainly not agree. As expected, Amber, with her hands on her hips and a determined tone, said firmly, Absolutely not. Rest assured, with your abilities, this exam will be a breeze for you. Her subsequent words softened a bit. All right. Lumen and Paimon shrugged, showing a somewhat disappointed expression. Nolan is much better at handling situations like this. Amber looked at their expressions helplessly, then took out a thick book from the vision and continued, Take a look at this flight guide. Before the formal exam begins, familiarize yourselves with the rules and standards of flying. Wow, it looks pretty thick. Luckily, I can fly with my illusory wings and don't need to take the exam to use the wind glider. Paimon patted her chest, feeling relieved. Lumen glanced at her disdainfully. Look at you, all proud. When Lisa taught me magic, she also made me read many thick books first. Anyway, you don't need to remember everything, just get a basic understanding. Amber changed her posture, now crossing her arms over her chest. All right, since that's the case, there's nothing we can do. Nolan nodded. Then let's sit here and quickly go over the key points. Paimon looked to the left side of the brick railing, where there was a grayish-white roof with a spire. Along the spire, she noticed something familiar and exclaimed in surprise. Hey, traveler, look! There's a strange device here too. Hearing Paimon's words, everyone followed her gaze and saw a large torch-like device emitting a red light quietly placed under the spire. Oh, you mean that? It mysteriously appeared there when the Knights of Favonius headquarters was built, and it's just as magical as the treasure chest. Everyone has long been used to it, and no one knows what its purpose is. Amber explained with a look of realization after thinking for a moment. This was an unlit teleportation waypoint, which Nolan had already seen before, but unfortunately, he couldn't use it. Only those with special powers like Lumen can activate and use it. Hehe, we know about this. Paimon smiled, placing her hands behind her back. You know. Amber looked at Paimon in surprise. Yeah, the first time we encountered this device was on the beach outside of Stormbearer Point. Out of curiosity, we touched it, and suddenly, that torch-like thing floated up from its base, and the red light changed to blue. Lumen, with one hand holding the backless white dress wrapped around her chest and the other hand supporting her chin, reminisced. Her snow-white skin with gentle curves was slightly lifted as she continued. I examined the device and found that as long as you touch it again, you can choose to teleport to another device that you've activated. What? They're teleportation devices. Amber was clearly surprised, and Nolan, standing beside her, mirrored the same expression. Yeah, and the traveler can even take me along for the ride. Unfortunately, we only found one on the beach, one on a hill far beyond Mondstadt Bridge, and one above the streets near the Fountain Square. But the one on the street is in plain sight, so the traveler didn't activate it to avoid attracting attention. Paimon shared what she knew. So that's how it is. Could this be another special ability like your purification? Amber felt incredulous, but she didn't doubt it. After all, the traveler was someone full of unknowns. I'm not sure, actually, Lumen shook her head, indicating uncertainty. How about it? Do you want to experience the feeling of teleportation? Let the traveler activate this teleportation device and take you outside Mondstadt to see. Paimon looked at the teleportation waypoint and said to Amber and Nolan. Is it possible? Amber was intrigued. Nolan also looked at Lumen with curiosity. Of course. Lumen nodded. I'll go activate this teleportation device first. After saying that, Lumen effortlessly climbed up the spire above the Knights of Favonius headquarters. Taking a few steps forward with her legs clad in over-the-knee white boots, she gently touched the teleport waypoint with her fair palm. Suddenly, a dazzling blue light flashed, and the teleport waypoint floated up from its grayish-white, stone-like base. I can't believe it actually changed. Amber's deep brown hair covering her hips swayed gently in the breeze as she watched. Her hair tip slightly brushed against her snow-white thighs. Next, Lumen took Amber and Nolan separately to try teleporting to the waypoint outside Mondstadt, and then quickly returned. This proved Paimon's words to be true. So fast. One moment you close your eyes, and the next moment, the world has changed. It's similar to Lisa's spatial transfer magic. Amber found that using the teleportation device for spatial transfer didn't feel particularly special. There was no discomfort in her body or anywhere else, everything felt natural. It's indeed marvelous. This can be considered a significant discovery for the continent of Teyvat. Nolan also sighed slightly. Yeah, that's right. You two stay here and familiarize yourselves with the contents of the flight guide. I'll go report to Acting Grand Master Jean. Before Amber could finish speaking, she ran downstairs in a hurry. Ah, Amber is such a spirited girl. Paimon, wearing a crown on her head, shrugged helplessly and sighed. Next, Nolan and Lumen sat on the railing and opened the book Amber had given them to read. Paimon, although exempt from the exam, floated curiously behind them, her gaze passing through the two of them and landing on the pages of the book. Before long, Paimon, slightly puzzled, said, although I've only read a dozen pages, why does the book Amber gave us feel less like a flight guide and more like, what was it again? She scratched her pure white hair, unable to remember for a moment. Like a fable, Lumen's fair face showed a pensive expression. Nolan nodded, recalling that in the game's plot, Amber had mistakenly given Lumen a fable about courage instead of the flight guide. At this point in time, it should be mismatched with the time of the game's plot, but unexpectedly, she still made the same mistake. Only you, Amber. Soon, the wooden door on the rooftop was pushed open again, and Amber came out with Acting Grand Master Jean and Miss Lisa. Oh, cutie, I heard you've caused another commotion. Miss Lisa, wearing a purple dress robe, crossed her arms and said lazily. She was reading in the library when she heard from Jean and little Amber that the strange device on the rooftop had been activated by Lumen. Naturally, this piqued her curiosity, so she chose to come and take a look. After all, she had never heard of anyone being able to make these things change. After all, she's the miraculous traveler from another world. Paimon smiled and said. In any case, Lisa, why don't you go and see if you can figure out something, so as not to hide any imperceptible dangers? Jean looked at the device above the spire with some doubt. I've studied it over 100 times. I hope I can see something this time. Lisa's legs, wrapped in over-the-knee black lace stockings, showed a symmetrical and gentle curve in the sunlight as she stepped into a purple magic circle in front of her and walked in with high heels. Then she appeared in front of the strange device on the spire, which was already lit up and emitting a blue light, and began her research. During this time, Lumen was asked to teleport a bit, and in the end, she came up with a conclusion that she herself was not too sure about. Lisa believed that these devices should be waypoints set in key nodes of the ley lines. Like carriages, they allow users to briefly participate in the circulation of the ley lines using these waypoints and then emerge from another waypoint. Although the circulation of the ley lines is fast, it's somewhat different from spatial transfer magic. The closer the two waypoints are, the shorter the time required for teleportation, but if they are far apart, there may be some delay. Hearing Lisa's explanation, Nolan felt that it seemed quite reasonable. After all, when he used the teleport waypoints in the game, if they were close, there was hardly any loading time, but if they were farther away, it would take several seconds to load. Thus, Lisa's guessed principle of operation for the teleport waypoints was just right. Unfortunately, she had no clue about how to activate the waypoints. For now, only Lumen could do that. After clarifying the matter of the teleport waypoints, acting Grandmaster Jean finally felt relieved. She still trusted Lisa more, although it was just a guess, but since she dared to say it, it was probably not far from the truth. After Lisa and acting Grandmaster Jean left the rooftop, Amber asked Nolan and Lumen if they had finished reading the flight guide, only to be embarrassedly informed that she had given them the wrong book. There was no choice but for her to search for another book in her vision. This book was of similar color and thickness, no wonder Amber carelessly took the wrong one without noticing. To save time, Teacher Amber personally picked out the key points to explain to Nolan and Lumen the things they needed to pay attention to when using the wind glider for flight. For example, two people cannot share a wind glider, cannot use an Mo slime for takeoff in violation of regulations, cannot use wind gliders while intoxicated, and so on. After confirming that both of them had memorized it, Amber's flight test officially began. Chapter 144, Encounter at the Blacksmith Shop. The first step before flying is to make sure that you are in good physical and mental health. Amber, with her hands clad in brown gloves, pressed them against the belts on either side of her waist. She glanced at Nolan and Lumen, then continued, "From the looks of you, there shouldn't be any problems. Then let's talk about the first test item, which is to take off from a higher terrain, then fly steadily for a while paying attention to the wind direction and conditions. We'll fly from the Knights of Favonius headquarters rooftop to the windmill tower near the city wall." "Oh, that sounds easy," Nolan said, understandingly. "Hee, that's right. It seems we'll be able to handle it easily," Paimon said, arms crossed, with a smile. "Don't be careless, after all, there are many cases of violations that have already told us that most accidents occur due to carelessness during flight," Amber explained, citing examples from the flight guide. Like the Mondstadt citizen Rudolph, who, to amuse his daughter, jumped from his second-floor window with the wind glider, fracturing his left leg and bruising his hip on landing. Or the bard Joseph, who insisted on showcasing his musical skills in the air to impress his drinking buddies, only to plunge from the sky into the wishing pool under Lord Barbados's feet. Though uninjured, he was banned from flying by the Knights of Favonius for 5 years. There was also the legendary adventurer, Miss Alice, who publicly used the Wind Slime's airstream to take off, drawing the acting Grandmaster's ire. So even if you are honorary knights, when flying in Mondstadt, don't get too cocky. If you cause any negative consequences, the knights will punish you. Amber warned in conclusion. Paimon nodded after listening. Hee, got it. The traveler and I are law-abiding tourists. As for this guy. She glanced mischievously at Nolan and shrugged. Hey, what's with that look, you little troublemaker Paimon? Nolan said, feeling speechless at her antics. All right, I'll fly over first. Follow my lead when you're ready to start flying, Amber said, standing on the brick railing with her legs clad in over-the-knee white high-heeled boots, slightly leaning forward, then leaping off with her wind glider spread out. She glided like a large red bird. The sunlight caressed Amber's relaxed, snow-white thighs as they hung down, casting a slightly dazzling reflection. Not long after, she stopped on the walkway near the windmill tower in the distance, then turned around and waved back at the others. Lumen and Nolan saw Amber's signal and subsequently launched their wind gliders and flew out. For these veteran drivers, the exam was simply no challenge at all. The wind glider, slightly trembling, revealed Lumen's snow-white back, with her symmetrical and gentle shoulder blades becoming more prominent as she spread her arms. A gentle breeze brushed Nolan's face as the two of them landed smoothly on the wooden walkway above the windmill tower. Amber clapped her hands and said, "You two are indeed honorary knights. The standard flight license exam set by the knights was indeed too easy for you." "That's true, but this kind of exam still depends on luck. If an unexpected crosswind comes, I dare not say we can fly over to meet the standard," Nolan said with a touch of emotion. This flight license exam reminded him of memories of taking the driver's license exam for motor vehicles back on Earth. "Well, that's true. I remember a young adventurer named Bennett who always had various strange accidents every time he came to take the flight license exam with the knights. He still hasn't passed yet." Amber casually said as if she had thought of something, mainly because that level of bad luck was truly impressive. So it was Bennett. Nolan had already associated him with being unlucky just by hearing that name alone. "Anyway, before we proceed to the next exam phase, Paimon, could you please pick up the debris hanging on the windmill rotor?" Amber asked as Paimon leisurely flew over. "Of course, no problem," Paimon said with a smile on her fair little face. After dealing with the debris, Amber took out a pale yellow piece of paper from her vision and handed it to Lumen, saying, "This is a missing person notice I made based on the appearance of your brother as mentioned earlier. Take a look to see if there's anything else to add. Seeking the missing young man with distinctive blonde exotic clothing. Any information, please contact Scout Knight Amber. Much appreciated." Lumen read the contents aloud, parting her soft lips. Apart from the lack of a portrait, there were no major issues, Nolan thought to himself after glancing at it. After posting the missing person notice, Amber and the others went to the city wall. The second test phase was obstacle avoidance, which also didn't pose a challenge for Nolan and Lumen. As time passed, the debris blown onto the city wall was cleared, and the missing person notices were mostly posted in their designated spots. "That's great, the area we needed to clear has been cleared. Thanks to you all, it wouldn't have been done so quickly without your help. The rest can be left to our fellow knights and the citizens themselves," Amber said near the Good Hunter restaurant. "Fountain Square and the streets have returned to their bustling state as usual," she added, addressing Nolan and the others. "Amber has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 150 affection points. Current affection level, level 5, 100/500. No need to be polite, after all, we're honorary knights too," Nolan said with a smile on his face. "Well, you guys also passed your flight license, wait for a few days and the knights will have them issued and I'll bring them over to you," Amber said before bidding farewell to attend to her other duties. Next, Nolan and Lumen still planned to go to the Adventurers Guild to pick up a commission. But before that, Nolan went to the blacksmith shop to find Wagner and collect the elemental arrows he had customized last time. After such a long time had passed, it was no surprise that they were ready. When they arrived at the blacksmith shop, they unexpectedly saw a familiar figure mentioned earlier, Bennett. "Uncle Wagner, can't you lower the repair cost a bit? With 200,000 mora, I could buy a new one." The blonde-haired youth was bargaining with the burly man there. "Bennett, what are you talking about? A 3-star one-handed sword starts at least at 1 million. Look at your broken sword, it has several deep cuts. To repair it, we'll need to forge it again with new materials, and their cost is almost the same as this price," Wagner explained helplessly. "What nonsense are you spouting, Bennett? And, what's there for me to cheat about? Besides, the most important thing to me, is my reputation." "Hello there, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Wagner," Nolan greeted the two. "Oh, it's you, kid. I thought you didn't want those elemental arrows anymore," Wagner said, crossing his massive arms. "How could that be? I'm here to pick them up," Nolan replied with a smile. "Oh, Nolan, it just so happens I've been looking for you lately," Bennett said, slightly surprised to see Nolan and the others, then remembering something. A few days ago, he heard from the hunters in Springvale that there were strange wolves appearing in the Wolvendom. He wanted to go on an adventure there, but he got delayed for a few days because of the storm terror incident. Seeing the good weather yesterday, he thought of going to find Nolan to go on an adventure together, but when he tried to find him, he realized he didn't know where he lived. Unable to locate him, he had to go and check out the situation by himself, and almost didn't make it back. You're looking for me? Nolan was a bit puzzled. Chapter 145, Monsters from Another World. In Mondstadt City, at the blacksmith's shop, Bennett recounted the recent events he had encountered. So, you're saying there are fierce-looking flying wolves in the Wolvendom, and you almost got injured? Nolan's face showed a slight expression of surprise as he spoke. Fierce-looking and flying. If I'm not mistaken, those must be the monsters from the other world, a rift wolf or a rift hound or maybe rift hound whelp. Back when the game was updated, even Noel, whom he always took along no matter what, would be severely damaged by them. Once attacked by these creatures, even through a shield, it would cause a long-lasting bleeding effect. In the game, it was manageable, but if one were scratched by them in reality, they might quickly bleed to death. In other words, they were much more dangerous than you'd think. Fortunately, Bennett's elemental burst had a healing effect, otherwise, he might really have fallen in the Wolvendom. Speaking of which, Bennett might be unlucky, but regardless of the circumstances, he could always turn the situation around. Perhaps that's why his constellation/seat of destiny/archon seat is called Fire Ventures with Me. The adventure process may be perilous, but the ending is always satisfactory. Yet, I've never seen those monsters before. They seem quite strange, and I don't know why they suddenly appeared in the Wolvendom territory. Bennett said as he stroked his blonde hair. It sounds interesting. How about we investigate? After all, as they say, the greater the danger, the greater the adventure. Besides, the unknown often signifies treasure. Paimon, who was listening nearby, adjusted the position of her floating crown on her head and smiled. Lumen, with her hands on her soft waist, looked at Paimon with some exasperation and said, in case of unusual circumstances, you should first inform the Knights of Favonius or the Adventurers Guild, don't take unnecessary risks. Hey! Paimon blinked one eye and stuck out her tongue. This friend with golden hair is right. Let's go report the unusual situation in the Wolvendom to the guild first, Bennett agreed with a nod. Hehe, she's Lumen and I'm Paimon. Paimon briefly introduced himself and Lumen. I'm Bennett. Nice to meet you both, Bennett said with a smile. Before heading to the Adventurers Guild, Nolan also picked up the elemental arrows made of water elemental ore at the blacksmith's shop. Wagner's forging skills were still good, he forged 60 arrows from 3 pieces of water elemental ore. Since Nolan provided the main raw materials, he only charged a crafting fee of 30,000 mora, and the wooden shafts for the arrows weren't worth much either. Ad Astra Abyssosk. Welcome to the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist, Catherine, dressed in a maid-style dress, smiled as she looked at the familiar faces approaching from outside. Hello, Miss Catherine, Paimon, who had only recently met Catherine, spoke in a tone that made it seem like they were quite familiar. Hello, Paimon. Are you here to take on a commission? Catherine politely inquired, her hands elegantly folded in front of her. No, Miss Catherine, we've discovered some unusual occurrences in the Wolvendom, Bennett reiterated what he had just told Nolan and the others. I see. Have unknown dangerous monsters appeared? Catherine pondered for a moment, then nodded. I understand. If what you say is true, then these monsters are indeed very dangerous. It's necessary to investigate them, so. So what? Paimon scratched her head, a bit puzzled. Catherine's fair face showed a gentle smile as she faced everyone. So, such a dangerous task is difficult for ordinary people to handle. Why not have the traveler, who was able to repel the wind dragon, to take the lead and take it on? Me? Lumen showed a slightly surprised expression. Of course, no one is more suitable than you and your companions, Catherine confirmed with a nod. Hearing Catherine's words, Paimon clasped her hands behind her back and said with a smile, Hehe, as expected, we're heading to the Wolvendom in the end. That shouldn't be a problem. After all, we're here to take on commissions anyway, Nolan said, rubbing his chin. Makes sense, Lumen twirled a strand of her golden hair around her finger, showing no objections. Bennett, needless to say, was eager to take on the task. After all, he was the first to discover the anomalies in the Wolvendom, and as someone aspiring to be a great adventurer, he couldn't simply ignore these dangerous monsters. Thank you very much. Please prepare adequate supplies before setting out. I'll report this information to Branch Master Cyrus and have him prepare the specific commission details, Catherine politely excused herself from the reception desk. Catherine has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 150 affection points. Current affection level, LV.3, 70/300. Catherine is right. This time, we have to prepare properly this time, we can't eat roasted meat without seasoning again. Paimon said, spreading her hands and looking at Lumen. Clearly, their life in the wilderness before arriving in Mondstadt wasn't all that wonderful. Next, the group spent some time purchasing essential items for wilderness adventures. For example, Nolan's tent was broken and needed to be replaced with a new one. In Mondstadt City, there was a shop specializing in outdoor adventure gear for adventurers. Before long, they bought everything they needed and returned. To Nolan's slight surprise, in addition to Branch Master Cyrus, there were also two familiar figures who came back with Catherine. Fiscal and her familiar, Night Raven Ounce. Hee my attendants, it has been a long time. Undoubtedly, you must have missed this princess deeply. Fiscal, with her long golden hair, saw Nolan and raised her fair cheeks slightly as she spoke. Aya, the young miss still often misses you guys in the course of her investigation mission. Ounce said as he flapped his night-colored wings. Mind your words, Ounce. Fiscal retorted discontentedly. Long time no see, Miss Fiscal and Ounce, Bennett greeted with a smile. Nolan also greeted Fiscal and Ounce and introduced Lumen and Paimon to everyone to get acquainted. He then asked with some confusion, how come you're here? Did Mr. Cyrus ask you to come over to investigate the monsters in the Wolvendom together? Haha, you guessed it right, kid. Little Fiscal here is a very capable investigator for our Adventurers Guild. With her, you'll have a much easier time, Cyrus, wearing a monocle, laughed loudly. Nolan's thoughts were confirmed, and he naturally welcomed Fiscal and Ounce's joining. After all, as the branch master said, Fiscal's assistance in investigating the Rift Hounds would be of great help. Shortly after, Branch Master Cyrus officially announced the Adventurers Commission. The commission was designated as high risk, with a reward of 2 million mora. Hearing this amount made Paimon extremely excited. Then, this ad hoc adventure team set out. Out of curiosity, Nolan activated his golden eye of judgment to glance at Cyrus, the former legendary adventurer, and discovered that his level was 60, indeed not weak. Surprisingly, the gentle and elegant Catherine also had a level of 20. Perhaps it was because of her puppet nature? Nolan speculated. Chapter 146, Appearance of Rift Hound. Mondstadt, Springvale. On their way to Wolvendom, the temporary adventure team decided to stop here first and inquire about any clues. Even before they entered the small town, they saw a group of hunters from Springvale gathered on the roadside discussing something. Leading them was their hunting chief, Draf. No, chief, I must slaughter those damn beasts. I trust my archery skills, exclaimed a young hunter wearing a hat, filled with excitement. That's too risky. They're not ordinary wolves, they're monsters. Draf, with a beard, shook his head. I think even if all the hunters in our town went out, it might not be enough. Besides, such behavior is foolish. We should go and ask the Knights of Favonius for help. Long time no see, Mr. Draf, Nolan greeted as he approached. Oh, Nolan, it's you. Indeed, it's been a while, Draf, slightly surprised to see Nolan, replied. Then, he smiled and said, are you here to share a drink with me? Haha, sorry, Mr. Draf. We heard about the strange monsters appearing in Wolvendom, so we took on a commission to investigate. By the way, is what you just said related to this matter? Nolan scratched his head awkwardly, then asked with a puzzled expression. Well, indeed. Draf lowered his gaze thoughtfully and explained, Wolvendom is our main hunting ground in Springvale. Generally, there aren't any powerful monsters there that we can't handle. But yesterday, 2 of our hunting teams came back injured. Their faces were pale, as if they hadn't eaten for days. According to them, it was a type of creature that looked like a wolf. Being scratched by them causes continuous bleeding. 2 of them had minor wounds less than a centimeter, yet the whole team's hemostatic and healing potions were almost depleted just to barely stop it. It's terrifying. If we don't clear them out, no hunters in Springvale will dare to go hunting there. We're troubled by this. After all, not everywhere was like Wolvendom, which was more suitable as a long-term hunting ground in all aspects of conditions. The matter of unstoppable bleeding had been mentioned by Bennett earlier. He had encountered these creatures and was injured by them, but he easily resisted them with the healing effects of his elemental burst. It seems that they have already endangered the residents in the neighborhood, Lumen said thoughtfully. Just then, a slightly chubby hunter rushed over hastily from outside, shouting as he ran, "Bad news, Chief! Those guys have appeared on the roads near the town." "What?" At once several hunters including Draf were shocked and ran outside. "Are they saying those strange monsters from Wolvendom have come near Springvale?" Paimon watched the departing figures, scratching his head in confusion. "If that's the case, it's really troublesome. If the monsters stay in Wolvendom and they stay away from Wolvendom to avoid danger, but running to the vicinity of Springvale means there's no way to avoid it anymore," Nolan said with a heavy heart. "Hounds, follow them." Fiskal, with her symmetrical legs wrapped in asymmetrical black stockings, began to sway slightly. She and her raven ounce immediately followed Draf and the others without hesitation. The rest of the temporary adventure team followed closely behind. Leaving the hunters to face these monsters alone would be too dangerous. Not long after, the group of people arrived at a small hill where they could observe the road below. They clearly saw a huge wolf-like creature hovering in the air with several smaller companions swaying in the grass by the roadside. "Yes, those are the strange wolves from Wolvendom." Bennett revealed a look of still having some second thoughts. The sword he had used for a long time was damaged by this kind of creature. "Appearing near Springvale, for the safety of the townsfolk, we must clear them out." The hunter who had been excited and looked younger earlier was once again stirred up. One of the two injured yesterday was his younger brother. He wanted to avenge his brother. "Unfortunately, we have no choice. With our numbers, as long as we use our bows and arrows to maintain enough distance, defeating them shouldn't be difficult." Draf nodded helplessly. He began instructing the 6 or 7 hunters present to prepare for the attack. "Wait." Nolan was slightly puzzled when he heard Draf's words. Didn't they know that these bleeding wolves could move instantaneously? In the field of vision of his golden eye of judgment, those rift wolves were shown to be only level 20 or so, and Draf and his group might barely be able to handle them. But the leader, the Rift Hound, was level 40's level 40. With its ability to traverse space, a swipe from it would mean certain death for ordinary people, even without the bleeding effect. "What's wrong?" Draf said with some doubt. Nolan explained, "I have a special ability to see that they are very strong, beyond what you can handle. So let us handle it." "Chief, this..." A slightly plump hunter looked at Nolan, then at Draf. He clearly saw that most of the people here had the vision and were definitely much stronger than them. If this adventure team was willing to help, it would be great. After a moment of contemplation, Draf nodded. Nolan's and Lumen's defeating of the Strom Terror and becoming honorary knights had already spread throughout Mondstadt. He was long gone from the young apprentice who had followed him to learn archery some time ago. Isn't this growth speed a bit unbelievable? While Draf was thinking this, his eyes caught a glimpse of the fiery red glass ball hanging around his neck. So he's obtained a vision. That explains it. The hunters, upon hearing that Nolan and the others were willing to intervene, acknowledged their own insufficient strength and didn't hesitate. Hehe, while these monsters haven't noticed us yet, we can launch a surprise attack and see if we can heavily damage that big guy. Paimon pointed his index finger at the Rifthound in the distance, her starry eyes twinkling as she spoke. Oh, Paimon's idea is quite constructive. I'm sure Nolan is thinking the same thing right now, Knight Raven Ounce chuckled, knowing Nolan's combat style well from their adventures together. That is, strike first with a surprise attack, and if you can't win, carry the team and run away together. That's right, I've already seen that wolf-like monster has an old wound on its back spine, later on Her Royal Highness can aim to attack there. Nolan nodded. He reiterated the fact that he could see weaknesses with his eyes, and quickly prepared to attack with Fiskal, who was also an archer. During this time, Bennett asked if they needed him to activate his elemental burst to boost their power. Nolan thought about it and felt that it would be better to keep his ultimate ability, just in case anyone was scratched by the bleeding dog. It would be troublesome if it was not healed in time. Chapter 147, Attraction. Using his gaming memories to understand the Rifthound's attack habits, Nolan urged Draf and the others to retreat a bit to avoid being affected by their counterattacks later. As Fiskal's lightning element arrow cut through the air in a graceful arc, just about to hit the Rifthound, Nolan's fire element arrow flew out first. The weak points on the Rifthound's back, as discovered by the golden eye of judgment, were sequentially hit by the fire and lightning elemental arrows. This caused damage from both fire and lightning elements, and the subsequent overload reaction blasted it back. The Rifthound couldn't help but howl, indicating that it was seriously injured. Although Nolan had a minor damage bonus specialty Monster Slayer, as well as the boost from the artifact set effect, he couldn't defeat a monster 10 levels higher than himself with a single strike. Even with Fiscal's assistance in triggering overload, it was the same. If it were Abyss mages who hadn't activated their elemental shields yet, they could be taken down relatively easily. After all, without their shields, they were truly weak. Perhaps the elemental shield was their true form. Everyone, be careful, they're coming. Nolan's mind was filled with thoughts as he also kept an eye on the movements of the creatures. Rifthound and Rifthound whelps paid attention to Nolan and the others on the small hill as they were being attacked. Suddenly, without warning, they disappeared from their original positions. According to Nolan's memory, they would reappear behind everyone and launch a surprise attack. They might appear from behind. Everyone, get out of the way. Despite being somewhat surprised by the sudden disappearance of these wolf-like creatures, everyone present had ample combat experience and didn't panic. After Nolan's reminder, they quickly realized the likelihood of this happening. So they quickly backed away, and the next moment, these creatures indeed appeared in the air above where they had originally stood, their sharp claws instantly striking down. But unfortunately, they missed. Nolan didn't miss this opportunity. He put away his adventurer hunting bow and quickly switched to the dull blade, instantly releasing the fire element from the delusion and attaching it to the Rifthound's forehead with a max-level sword technique. Also launching an attack was Bennett, who was about to use his elemental burst when suddenly his foot slipped on the grass and he fell to the ground. As expected, his unlucky constitution had just been triggered. Seeing this, Ounce quickly stepped in and spat out a thundering magic bullet to make up for the missing attack. Then, Lumen, with her fair palm, conjured a rapidly spinning vortex of wind. With soft, rosy lips parted, she shouted. Wind Vortex Sword. The fire element attached to the Rifthound instantly spread to the other creatures. The heavily injured Rifthound and several weak Rifthound whelps couldn't hold on for long. Defeat powerful enemies *5, obtain 2305 Adventure Express. As the monsters were defeated, the prompt for gaining Adventure EXP popped up. Nolan had defeated the Rifthound, gaining over 1700 Adventure Express. The others, defeated by Lumen, didn't receive many experience points due to their lower levels. And this part, he could only get 1/3 of it, so it's only a little over 2000 Adventure EXP. Amazing, the cooperation between you all was absolutely splendid. Draff and the hunters applauded. Hehe, it's nothing much. Paimon smiled, as if basking in the praise. Mr. Draff, actually, the Adventurers Guild is already aware of the abnormal situation in the Wolvendom territory. We're the ones who accepted the commission to investigate, Nolan explained. Since they've already appeared near Springvale Town, it's conceivable that there will be more inside Wolvendom territory. Recently, it's better for you not to hunt there. Let the Adventurers Guild handle the matter first, he advised. Of course, said Draff, dressed in hunter attire, crossing his arms and nodding. Lumen's golden hair fluttered in the breeze as she remembered their purpose for coming here and asked, by the way, Mr. Draff, when your hunting team returned from Wolvendom yesterday, did they notice where these creatures emerged from? Draff hadn't gone hunting yesterday, so he thought for a moment before replying, we don't know exactly where they came from. But according to the injured hunters, they encountered these unfamiliar creatures in the Wolfhook Fruit Forest of Wolvendom territory. You can go there to see if there are any other clues. Hey, it's not far from where I encountered them, remarked Bennett, rubbing his nose somewhat unexpectedly. He had just taken a tumble for no apparent reason, landing right on his nose. Oh, that's quite a coincidence. Then let's go there first and take a look. Perhaps we'll find some clues, suggested Ounce, flapping his night raven wings. Nothing can escape the gaze of this princess's great illusionary dream all-seeing eye of madness. Fiscal raised her right hand, covering her left eye with the black eye patch, striking a handsome pose. Next, the temporary adventure team continued on toward the Wolvendom. As for the bodies of the beast domain creatures on the ground, Nolan asked Mr. Draff and the other hunters to take the bodies to the Adventurers Guild and the Knights of Favonius for further examination. Perhaps they would make some discoveries. He didn't know much about the bleeding wolves himself. They seemed to have been created by the renowned Mondstadt alchemist, Albedo's mentor, Goldrindottir, using alchemy combined with powers from beyond the world. With an ability called erosion, which is why their attacks cause bleeding. And their instinct is to dissolve the boundaries of the world and traverse space, which is also why they are so dangerous. In short, they were a very dangerous group of creatures. Wolvendom. By the time they arrived, it was almost dark, and continuing to move would be unwise. They first set up a tripod on a relatively open grassland, with a cauldron hanging in the middle containing a black base, and the boiling soup turned milky white. At the same time, they erected 4 tents side by side, with Nolan also setting up a small bonfire rack made of wood on the outer perimeter. The burning flames illuminated the darkness around them and kept the usual wild beasts at bay. Of course, this was only for ordinary beasts, as it was now. A group of rift hounds, capable of flying like Paimon, stared at the approaching group, their numbers much greater than those encountered in Springvale town. There were already 3 rift hounds alone, and over 10 rift hound whelps. We've only been here for a short time. Why did they find us so quickly and gather so many companions to surround us? Paimon exclaimed, looking surprised. Bennett scratched his ash-blonde hair, speculating, I heard from the old folks that dogs and wolves are the same kind of creatures, with very keen noses. I think these black wolf packs are the same. Perhaps they smelled the scent of their dead kin on us and came seeking revenge. Chapter 148, Cunning Rift Wolf's Pack. According to Bennett, it wasn't impossible. Otherwise, there was no other explanation. After all, they were still on the edge of Wolvendom, and the camping spot was so open and empty. According to the habits of creatures, they shouldn't choose to settle near such an environment. There were too few hiding places and they could easily be discovered by enemies. Everyone be careful, they might be about to attack. Lumen said, her legs apart, wearing knee-high boots, and her body slightly lowered in a defensive stance. The snow-white thighs revealed under the diagonal hem of her skirt seemed to tighten slightly as well. This group of otherworldly creatures, led by the 3 rift hounds in the lead, like hunters closing in on their prey, approached the members of the temporary adventure team step by step. This isn't going to work. There are so many of them. What should we do? It feels like we might not be able to handle it, Paimon said, her face full of worry, hiding behind Lumen. It is indeed troublesome. Those big black wolves are no weaker than the one we encountered earlier, Nolan said. Although his eye of judgment was golden, it didn't shine in the darkness. After all, he wasn't some kind of feline with glowing eyes. At this moment, among the attacking creatures, one of the rift hounds, along with several whelps, dissolved the boundaries of the world and traversed deeper layers of space, while the others remained motionless. No way, they're so cunning. Seeing this situation, Nolan couldn't help but feel a little anxious. At the same time, everyone had experienced this situation before. The 5 of them quickly left their original positions, and sure enough, a black wolf suddenly appeared above their original location, its claws swinging down. Seeing it miss, Nolan hadn't even breathed a sigh of relief when several rift wolf whelps suddenly appeared beside him, their mouths full of sharp teeth ready to bite. Nolan raised an eyebrow, instantly releasing the fire elemental to attach to the dull blade from his delusion. Using the extraordinary property of his swordsmanship, Boundary of Stillwind, he easily sensed the airflow movements around him. After dodging the whelp's attacks, he seized the opportunity to stab the fire element attached longsword into the bright weak spot under one whelp's jaw, piercing straight through its skull. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 435 Adventure Express. As the prompt popped up on the character panel, it proved that it was as dead could be. Attendant, be careful. As the rift hounds attacked the adventure team, scattering them, the other rift creatures split into several groups and attacked the others. These creatures with wolf-like habits are truly disgusting in their cunning. Fiscal, with a ready thunder elemental arrow, was about to shoot at the incoming young beast when, out of the corner of her eye, she silently spotted a huge black wolf behind Nolan. Quickly alerting them, she redirected her arrow towards the target while firing. Sensing the exposed vulnerability of the rift-hound whelp, it immediately lunged towards her arm. When Fiscal felt something was amiss and turned around, it was already too late. Miss. Ounce, shimmering with lightning, like a spinning drill, rushed into the mouth of the rift-hound whelp, tearing it apart. Just as Fiscal breathed a sigh of relief, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her calf. Another rift-hound whelp appeared from behind her, instantly biting the defenseless Fiscal, eliciting a painful whimper from her soft lips. Her entire body tingled with lightning, paralyzing the rift-hound whelp biting her calf. Biting her lip, Fiscal instantly attached lightning elemental to the arrow in her hand and released it at the rift-hound whelp beneath her foot. It had no chance to evade. The arrow of lightning, shot at close range, left its final consciousness forever shrouded in purple. Although the Rifthound whelp had died and slipped off Fiskal's leg, wrapped in her thigh-high black stockings, the corrosive force caused the wound it had bitten to continue oozing fresh red blood. Nolan, hearing Fiskal's warning, immediately moved away from his original position. A Rifthound had just emerged from the deep space, without causing any disturbance in the surrounding air. This caused him to miss it at first, but the following thunder elemental arrow sent it back into the deep space. Seeing Fiskal injured, Nolan was suddenly alarmed. This could be bad if not treated promptly. With anger rising in his heart, the fire elemental attached to his dull blade became fiercer. Using his full-level swordsmanship, he quickly killed 2 Rifthound whelp besieging him, swiftly running towards Fiskal's direction, shouting to Lumen and Bennett. "Everyone, come over quickly. These guys want to pick us off one by one." Lumen planted her dull blade in the grass, slowly breathing out a sigh of relief from her moist lips. The golden tips of her hair were slightly stuck together with sweat. Her amber eyes stared at the Rifthounds and Rifthound whelps in front of her, daring not to move recklessly, lest she reveal a flaw. Her backless dress had been slashed open across her abdomen at some point, revealing glimpses of the snowy white skin and navel beneath. With both sides evenly matched, it wasn't easy to fight. Suddenly, Lumen's dull blade whipped up a whirlwind, shattering the soil below and sweeping towards the Rifthounds. Seizing the moment when the Rift creatures diverted their gaze, she swiftly retreated towards Nolan and Fiskal. Bennett's side of the encounter was more dangerous. Not only did he have a Rifthound whelp hanging from each of his feet, he also had another one on his left shoulder, biting and not moving. With his right hand holding an unrepaired dark steel sword, he also had to deal with the Rifthound whelp in front of him. Near the entire campsite, several Rifthounds lurked in the deep space, ready to emerge and ambush at any moment. They seemed even more cunning than the intelligent abyss mages. Seeing Bennett's predicament, Nolan quickly drew his adventurer's hunting bow and continuously shot arrows with fire elemental attached at the Rifthound whelps biting him. With the silent and shadowless feature, the arrows seemed to ignore distance, accurately piercing their foreheads the next moment. Adventure EXP plus 426. Adventure EXP plus 399. Adventure EXP plus 501. Freed from danger, Bennett unleashed his elemental burst Passion Overload, piercing through the Rifthound whelp in front of him, swiftly running over to reunite with the others. At this moment, among the Rift monster, the 3 Rifthounds were still there. They also resurfaced in the deep space and appeared, staring at the several people with fierce gazes. The rest of the Rifthound whelp had been killed by the group, leaving only 4 or 5 remaining. Overall, their numerical advantage wasn't as significant anymore. "Bennett, you look pretty badly injured." Lumen looked at Bennett's wounds with some concern. "Haha, it's fine, I'm used to it all." Bennett rubbed the back of his head, revealing a smile, and said, "But it's time for us to fight back next. Setbacks, adversity, wounds, they're all part of the glorious journey to becoming great adventurers." With renewed determination, he jumped up in place, and then slammed his fist into the ground. A fiery red light spread across the grassy ground, forming a cheering domain with a pattern resembling a thumbs-up gesture. Chapter 149, Razor. On the outskirts of the Wolvendom, at the temporary campsite, Nolan and the others stood within Bennett's elemental burst domain, feeling their strength increase significantly. Fiskal's continuously bleeding wounds from the erosion power were quickly healed, leaving only torn stockings on her calves, revealing glimpses of snowy white skin. After all, the power of erosion was limited, and it soon depleted as time passed. Bennett, who was more seriously injured, experienced the same, his body instantly restored to full health. The Rift monsters were slightly silent when they saw this situation. They had exerted so much effort to injure just 2 of them, and now, inexplicably, they were healed. This instinctively enraged them, and the Rift creatures immediately sank into the deep space to shuttle through the boundaries of the world. Nolan and the others didn't dodge this time. After all, there was no way to get a power boost if they left Bennett's elemental burst. "Hounds, be on guard." Fiskal's purple-black skirt fluttered silently in the gentle breeze, revealing the snowy white skin beneath her black semi-transparent stockings. "Understood, miss." Hounds, who flapped his night-colored wings, hovered above the group, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Before long, the Rift creatures suddenly appeared beside them. Nolan, who had already prepared for this, once again attached the fire element to the dull blade, and used the heavy strike technique of swordsmanship to continuously strike twice, slashing through the air and landing on the head of the Rift Hound. The burning flames and the cutting edge brought intense pain to the beast domain hound, eliciting a fierce howl. Hounds, who hovering above them, saw the right moment to continuously shoot out thunder magic bullets to hit the rift creature that Nolan had wounded, drowning it in a combination of lightning elemental attacks and explosive overload reactions. Bursting Passion Overload, second stage heavy strike. Bennett slightly charged up his elemental skill, sweeping towards another Rifthound and the remaining Rifthound whelps. Under the boost of his elemental burst, the tremendous power instantly crippled them and pushed them back. Lumen, wearing knee-high white boots that revealed her snowy thighs, gracefully turned and executed a whirlwind kick, sweeping towards them. Fiscal, with her golden silky long hair, aimed a thunder element-infused arrow into the tornado formed by the wind element. In less than a second, the green tornado was instantly dyed purple by the thunderous vortex. The thunder vortex advanced in a straight line, sucking in all the rift creatures along the way, continuously inflicting elemental damage. Your teammate defeated powerful enemies *6, Obtain 1324 Adventure Express. As Lumen defeated a Rifthound and the remaining Rifthound whelps, there were only 2 Rifthounds left in the camp, one of which was severely injured by Nolan and Ounce. But it was also at this moment that Bennett's elemental burst duration ended, and the power boost for everyone gradually faded away. However, their current physical condition was at its peak in all aspects, fully capable of dealing with these 2 Rifthounds. Oh no, I see more wolves coming. Paimon, flying high to avoid the battle, saw many black shadows quickly approaching from the distant woods. Ah, it can't be that unlucky. Bennett's enthusiasm suddenly cooled a bit. He began to suspect if his bad luck had attracted the wolf pack. Wait, something's not right. Paimon, dressed in all white, put her hand to her forehead and looked out, then said with some confusion, they seem to be real wolves, not those dark guys. Phew, that's a relief, just ordinary beasts then. Bennett breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing Paimon's words. But ordinary beasts would have fled upon sensing the aura of monsters, why are they still coming this way? He scratched his head, puzzled. Maybe they're different somehow, Nolan said, understanding the situation. He sheathed his dull blade, switched to the adventurer's hunting bow, infused the arrows with fire elemental, and continued to aim at the already severely injured Rifthound. Now, in Nolan's golden eyes, there were bright weak points all over its body. In other words, its life was already like a candle in the wind, ready to be extinguished with a breath. A few seconds later, arrows imbued with fire elemental struck its head one after another, ending its wicked life. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 1775 Adventure Express. The remaining Rifthound, sensing the danger, instinctively wanted to shuttle through space to escape. Nolan attempted to stop it, not wasting time to infuse elemental power into the arrow. Arrow after arrow was swiftly shot out, launching the already limited number of armor-piercing arrows. Fortunately, although it didn't have the same powerful attack as fire element-infused ones, under the various effects of specialties, artifacts, and the like, the damage it caused was not to be underestimated. The pain in its body made it unable to concentrate on using the erosion power to dissolve the world's boundaries and enter the deep space. As a gregarious creature, the more companions there were, the bolder it became. If it still had companions, it might have fought ferociously, but when it was left alone, it preferred to fly higher to escape the human's attack range. Its idea was good, just as the Rifthound wanted to fly higher. 2 fiercely aggressive wild wolves suddenly darted out and leaped up, biting its tail. The sudden attack made the Rifthound's body sink, and when it turned its head, it found that it was just 2 local wolves that they had driven away, trying to bite it. A figure flashing with lightning suddenly leaped onto the Rifthound's head. Ow! He emitted a wolf-like cry, his hands wrapped in lightning transformed into claws, stabbing into its eyeballs, and riding on its back. Hey, who's that? Bennett looked at someone who actually pulled down the fierce wolf-like creature, somewhat surprised. Wolf boy. Fiscal, after seeing the appearance of the newcomer, showed a surprised expression on her fair face. There had always been rumors of a boy in Mondstadt who lived with wolves. Of course, she remembered such a story so similar to a fantasy novel. So now, seeing the boy in front of her pulling down the creature with 2 wolves, she also thought of that rumor. Sure enough, it was Razor. Nolan looked at the wild boy with grey hair wearing a hood not far away, pondering. In the game storyline introduction, Razor, the wolf boy, lived in the Wolvendom and lived with wolves. The appearance of the rift monsters must have also affected them. So it was not surprising that he found out that rift creatures were ravaging here and would come over to help. He watched as the Rift Hound was about to be killed, restraining the urge to intervene to avoid being misunderstood by this wolf boy and the two wolves. Not long after, Razor got up from the motionless Rift Hound. His wild and fierce expression softened, and he looked at the adventurers, speaking hesitantly as if still not fluent. "Thank you, you, fight them, why, come, here." Chapter 150, Secret Arts Level Skill. Hehe, we are the adventurer team investigating these creatures. Paimon floated down from high in the sky and replied lazily. Understood. Razor, with his grey hair, nodded, and the two wolves approached him, one on each side, licking his hand. "So, why are you here? And why are you helping us?" Paimon asked, somewhat puzzled, with her hands behind her back. "I Razor, and Lupus, live here." Razor touched the heads of the two wolves and said. "Lupus? Is that the name of a wolf?" Paimon asked, shifting her feet, clad in little boots, back and forth in the air and tilting her head to the side. "Yes, they, family." Razor looked at the two grey wolves, who appeared to be young, with gentle eyes. "Oh, miss, it seems the rumors were true. There really is a wolf boy in Wolvendom," Hounds, flapping his wings, said. "It does make this princess a bit surprised." Fiscal, with her hands crossed under her chest wrapped in a black fishnet patterned undershirt, nodded slightly. "Foreign monsters, disturb the peace here." Razor said haltingly, "I want to be with you." "You mean you want to help us investigate those creatures together?" Lumen, with two pretty white flowers pinned in her golden hair, asked. Yes." Razor nodded succinctly. "Hehe, that's great, one more person, one more power." Paimon clapped her hands, showing a happy expression. "Not one person, also Lupus, them." Razor rubbed the heads of the two wolves by his feet and said. Nolan pondered for a moment and asked, "Razor, since you have been living here, have you found out where they are distributed?" As gregarious creatures, rift monsters must be clustered together. If they were to investigate them, they would have to find them first. Not like just now, when they came looking for them, but actively seeking out their nests. After all, the danger of them was something that the adventure team had already learned just now. After reporting to the Adventurers Guild and the Knights of Favonius, they would most likely conduct a large-scale cleanup of Wolvendom. Even if they couldn't completely eradicate them, they would control them within a certain safe number. Otherwise, letting them expand wantonly in Wolvendom would eventually endanger the residents of Mondstadt. So Nolan's next task for them was to investigate roughly their number and location. And why these creatures appeared in Wolvendom is also something worth noting. "Lupus, kin, smell them," Razor said without hesitation. "So, you mean they also have a keen sense of smell? We might be surrounded by them before we even get close," Paimon said, spreading her hands in resignation. Razor was momentarily at a loss for words. "Hehe, it's simple. Just collect some herbs, crush them to extract the juice, and apply it to your body to mask most of the scent." Bennett, showing his expertise as an experienced adventurer, offered a very constructive suggestion. The girls all widened their eyes at once. "No way. Paimon doesn't want to smell all stinky." Paimon exclaimed, hands on her hips, shaking her head. Fiscal's purple-black skirt fluttered slightly in the wind, revealing her snow-white thighs clad in over-the-knee black stockings on the left side, which seemed to blush under the glow of the fire. She covered her mouth and coughed lightly before saying, "This princess also finds this matter somewhat inappropriate." Encounters like this were quite common for adventurers, but it didn't matter when faced alone. However, presenting oneself in such a sorry state in front of others did tarnish the princess's dignity. Wearing a white dress with a slit in the abdomen, Lumen hugged her chest, silently nodded, then pondered for a moment and sighed helplessly, "If there's really no other way, then so be it. Or let me go. I have stealth skills, so the chance of being detected is smaller," Nolan said with a slight smile. "Oh, right, Sir Nolan indeed possesses very powerful stealth skills." Hounds, who flapped his night-colored wings, nodded and said. "But if you go alone, what if you're accidentally discovered? Then you won't be able to escape." Paimon expressed some concern between her eyebrows. "Don't worry, I won't get too close to those black wolf packs, and you can support me nearby," Nolan said, shaking his head. He was confident mainly because the battle just now had earned him a lot of Adventure EXP points, enough to max out his stealth skill. Adventure EXP 9534. With over 9,000 Adventure EXP, he had more than enough to upgrade 2 skills. Great, then we'll rely on you, Nolan. Bennett knew himself very well, if he went along, even the most perfect plan might inexplicably fail. So, it was best to stay away from Nolan and support him from outside, which was indeed the best choice. Lumen and Fiscal also breathed a sigh of relief. As girls, they were a bit resistant to the idea of applying grass juice. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 180 affection points. Current affection level LV.5, 215/500. After discussing the strategy for tomorrow's operation, they began to clean up the battlefield. In fact, it was mainly Razor and Lupus who found the Rift Wolves, and then Nolan would stealthily go to investigate. Overall, it was quite a simple plan. While cleaning up the battlefield, the members of the adventure team noticed that the claws of these creatures seemed to be of good quality, possessing extraordinary strength. They could probably be sold for a good price as materials for forging or alchemy. Once everything was settled, they began to pack up their things and prepare to find a new camping spot for safety. After all, the original campsite was a bit unsafe. During the process of moving the camp, Nolan opened his character panel and began to prepare to enhance his strength. He decided not to level up this time since even with a 3-level increase, he wouldn't be able to roam freely in Wolvendom. First, he needed to upgrade his stealth assassination technique. At level 4, it only provided 10 minutes of invisibility, which was not enough. Adventure EXP 3900. Stealth Assassination Technique LV.4, 0/400, Concealment Mastery Secret Arts LV.1, 0/1000. As new knowledge appeared in his mind, Nolan was surprised to find that this stealth assassination technique had evolved from a common level to a secret arts level. Perhaps it was because it had the extraordinary characteristic of stealth invisibility. It doesn't need to be leveled up like other ordinary skills to derive extraordinary characteristics, so it directly transformed and evolved at max level. Nolan thought to himself with some surprise. Now, in addition to optical invisibility, this skill also had the effects of concealing one's presence and moving silently, with the duration extended to 1 hour. This way, he didn't have to go through the trouble of applying green grass to cover his scent. The only downside was that the level of the skill has not only reset, but the amount of Adventure EXP required for each level has also increased. Chapter 151, Odd Behavior. Nolan looked at the character panel, with over 5,000 Adventure EXP remaining. He could still max out another skill. Right now, his swordsmanship skill or archery skill only needed to fuse one more extraordinary characteristic to reach the minimum standard of the secret arts level. Even if luck wasn't on his side and there was no evolution, having an extra extraordinary characteristic wouldn't be bad either. However, there was also the question of whether to upgrade the archery skill or the swordsmanship skill. Nolan pondered for a moment. Considering the current situation, it was better to use long-range attacks against the Rift Wolves. After all, it was indeed a bit dangerous to fight them in close combat. With that in mind, Nolan made a decision. He decided to upgrade the archery skill he had previously learned from Fiscal Sin Purging Arrow. Adventure EXP, 4499. Sin Purging Arrow LV.1, 1/100, Sin Purging Arrow. LV.10, Condemnation/Fusible. A new arrow technique knowledge emerged in his mind, and the acquired extraordinary trait, Condemnation, significantly increased damage when hitting an enemy's weak point. This complemented his golden eyes of judgment, which allowed him to see weak points. At the same time, the maxed out Sin Purging Arrow also appeared to be fusionable. Without much hesitation, he directly fused it with Favonius Hunter's Archery. As a result, the text in the skill column slowly changed. The two skills overlapped and evolved into a brand new skill. Arrow of World's Descent Secret Arts LV.1, 1/1000. Nolan was lucky. After the archery skill obtained its third extraordinary feature, it evolved into a secret art. Looking at the name, it seemed to have morphed with the Sin Purging Arrow as the main body, very much a characteristic of Little Amy. As he felt the information appearing in his mind, he realized that the secret art Arrow of World's Descent not only perfectly integrated the original extraordinary features but also became even stronger. For example, the original Advanced Stability extraordinary feature was now more stable. As long as he could see and aim at the target, the arrows would hit with minimal interference. And Silent and Shadowless was no longer just about moving at lightning speed. This time, it truly possessed the ability to traverse space and ignore distances. Of course, due to its low level, the distance it could traverse through space wasn't too long, and the additional damage effect of condemnation was also stronger. Overall, this new archery skill's brand new extraordinary feature was very powerful. The only regret was that it couldn't change direction on its own, it still needed to be aimed, or else it would miss. While feeling a bit regretful, Nolan glanced at the character panel, which had undergone significant changes, feeling that it had suddenly become much tidier. Name, Nolan Walker. Level, LV.30, 0/3000. Race, Human. Title, Honorable Knight. Innate talent, Entangling Affection. Skills, Concealment Mastery Secret Arts LV.1, 0/1000, Arrow of Worlds Descent Secret Arts LV.1, 0/1000, Favonius Royal Swordsmanship LV.10, Flickering Candlelight, Boundary of Wind Still, Martial Arts LV.2, 0/200, Rhine One-Handed Sword Technique LV.1, 1/100. Specialties, Descender Maiden Savior Monster Slayer Abundant Life Gospel of the Sky. Adventure EXP, 1135. The remaining 1000 or so Adventure EXP could be kept for now, and the next step would be to try to raise the sword technique to the secret arts level as well. The sky sparkled with numerous stars, forming a galaxy-like pattern across the night view. This illuminated the night in Teyvat, making it not as dark as one might expect. As time passed, with the help of Razor, the adventurers' party found a new camping spot in the Wolvendom. The ground was covered in grass, with only a few short bushes nearby, and it looked quite empty. There was nothing around to hide the monsters or beasts that might want to ambush them. Therefore, this place was relatively safe. They took turns keeping watch at night, and before they knew it, a bright morning dawned. Razor set out with his 2 grey wolves to locate the territory of the Rift Wolves. With 2 keen-scented grey wolves, they were able to pinpoint the locations quite accurately. In only half a day or so, Nolan and the others found 5 or 6 places where there were rift creatures, and all of them had some rift hounds present. Using his secret art skill Concealment Mastery, Nolan was able to easily approach and observe them. Through his investigation, he discovered a common trait among these rift monsters: they didn't eat the prey they hunted but instead piled them up together, as if saving them for someone. This piqued everyone's interest, and Lumen suggested directly tracking these creatures to see what they were up to. Nolan naturally had no objections to this, but the task of investigating the number and location of rift hounds could not be abandoned. Therefore, the adventure team could only split up. Razor and Bennett as well as Fiscal continued to look for the rift monsters. With Ounce in the sky, they could confirm the location of the monsters. This way, there was no need to get close to the rift monsters and thus fall into danger. As for Lumen and Paimon, they teamed up with Nolan to provide support. After all, his skills had a time limit and couldn't be used continuously. If he were discovered during the cooldown period without anyone's help, he would be in trouble. Nolan, Lumen, and Paimon arrived near a group of monsters that they had found earlier, with 2 rifthounds and 6 rifthound whelps in terms of size. Compared to others, the overall strength of this group of monsters was relatively low. The 3 climbed a tree to conceal themselves, which also allowed them to observe the creatures from above. Since they were far enough from the monsters, they could blend their aura into the complex environment of the forest and grassland below, making it unlikely to be noticed. The reason Nolan didn't use the Concealment Mastery skill to approach was mainly that those rift monsters were still hunting and did not have any other intentions for the time being, so turning on the skill to get closer to observe them would be a waste of physical energy. They've already stored 3 wild boars. Why do they need so much food? Under the canopy, Paimon, floating above the golden-haired girl, asked with a puzzled expression on her face. Lumen, standing with her legs slightly apart on 2 sturdy branches, with her knees slightly bent, the slit skirt revealed white shorts underneath. Her gaze penetrated the green leaves as she looked into the distance. With her fair fingers resting against her soft chin, she speculated, perhaps they have a leader commanding them to collect food to bring back for it to eat. Nolan, sitting on a branch behind them, heard Lumen's speculation and felt it wasn't entirely impossible. If the rifthound whelps were the lower level of status amongst the rift wolves, the rifthounds were the middle rank, there was indeed a ruler above them. The Golden Wolf Lord. If it really appeared in the Wolvendom, that would be a big deal. That would mean that the appearance of these rift monsters was not an accident. Rather, it was a planned invasion of the Teyvat continent by the otherworldly rift, and the city of Mondstadt, which was adjacent to the Wolvendom, would undoubtedly be the first to be affected. Imagine if countless rift monsters appeared. It seemed that only Venti, the uncontrollable and Mo Archon, could blow away the entire Wolvendom territory to solve the problem. Look, they're taking their prey away. As Nolan chuckled to himself, Paymon's starry eyes blinked, and she keenly noticed that the rift monsters in the distance seemed to be starting to move. Chapter 152, Other Side of the Rift. They run so fast, we need to keep up, Lumen said, watching the rift monsters as they teleport with their prey, her ember eyes widening slightly. Just as she wanted to jump down from the tree to the ground, the heel of her shoe that was stepping on the branch slipped forward, scraping the bark of the tree as well as falling backward. Traveler. Paimon tried to grab her with both hands, but her reaction was a bit slow, and she only managed to brush against Lumen's hair with her fingertips. Of course, with her strength, she might have pulled herself down if she had managed to grab Lumen. Fortunately, although Lumen was not caught by Paimon, the direction she fell down was exactly the direction of Nolan, who was sitting on the tree branch. Seeing the golden-haired girl falling down, Nolan instinctively reached out his left hand to catch her. First, he felt the texture of the skirt rubbing against his hand, and then it turned into the smooth, soft touch of her snowy skin. There was a moment. The back of his hand seemed to have touched the silky fabric that was wrapped around something slightly weighty. Before Nolan could continue to wonder, the girl's buttocks, padded with the white skirt, hit his chest directly, and the weight of her entire body knocked him off balance, causing him to fall backward without anything to support him on the branch. A sense of weightlessness came over him as he felt the rising airflow brush past his face. With a thud, Nolan's back hit the ground, and his abdomen felt a soft yet forceful pressure. Oops! Are you guys okay? Paimon hurriedly flew down, looking worriedly at the two of them. Lumen, who was sitting on top of Nolan, realized that a hand had slipped through the tear in her dress and was now wrapped around her waist. Feeling an unfamiliar sensation along her waist and some of her ribs, a slight blush appeared on her fair face. You, hurry up and take your hand out, Lumen said with a disdainful and helpless expression, looking down at Nolan and parting her soft lips. Oops, sorry, Nolan just regained his senses, feeling slightly embarrassed as he awkwardly withdrew his hand. He hadn't expected it to slip in so conveniently. Phew, Lumen breathed a sigh of relief. Being held like that made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. She stood up, dusted off her dress, and then reached out her hand to Nolan, who was still lying on the ground. Are you okay? It just hurts a little, but no injuries. Nolan replied, clasping the soft, fair hand as he was helped up. He shook his head slightly. With his current physical strength, falling from this height and even with someone on top of him was nothing. Thank you, Lumen nodded her fair chin in gratitude. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 210 affection points. Current affection level, LV.5, 425/500. Phew. I'm relieved that you are both okay, Paimon said with some concern, patting her chest and sighing in relief. Let's go, we need to catch up quickly, or those monsters will get away, Lumen said, swinging her legs clad in knee-high boots and walking forward, her exposed snow-white thighs bathed in the bright sunlight. Okay, Nolan nodded. Although those rift monsters were using spatial teleportation to carry their prey and run, they couldn't descend into deep space continuously. They had to resurface periodically. This prevented Nolan and the others from losing track of them. It didn't take long for them to come to a wide space zone following rift wolves. To Nolan, Lumen, and Paymon's surprise, there were at least 20 to 30 rift hounds gathered in front of them, and the rift hounds' whelps were even more numerous. So many monsters! Paimon exclaimed in surprise, covering her mouth with her hands. What are they doing? The space over there seems to have cracked. Lumen, with her arms crossed over her chest, wearing white sleeves, looked somewhat surprised. I'll go take a closer look. It was time for Nolan to take action. He activated his secret art skill Concealment Mastery and stealthily approached. Now, as long as he didn't physically touch those creatures, he was unlikely to be detected. Nolan swaggered confidently toward the rift wolves. In terms of environment, there was nothing special about this place, it was just an ordinary corner of the Wolvendom, but it was home to many rift monsters. He saw the rift hounds that had brought their prey back here earlier, distributing the food they had hunted to their companions. Hiss! So, they went out hunting to bring food here for the monsters. And the monsters here weren't disabled and unable to hunt for themselves. Could it be, looked a bit like a division of labor? The division of labor among the rift monsters. While one group went out hunting for food, another part. Nolan paused on the grassy ground, gazing up at a rift in the sky. Another part of the rift monsters were using their corrosion power to dissolve and enlarge the rift. This is... Nolan seemed to understand what was going on. If he wasn't wrong, the rift monsters that had appeared in the Wolvendom territory were only a very small part of them. They were trying to continue expanding the border between Teyvat and the Rift Realm, allowing more of their comrades to descend, including the king of the Rift Wolves pack, the Golden Wolf Lord. Unexpectedly, it seemed to align with Lumen's speculation. Their leader really wanted to invade Teyvat. Nolan seemed to be able to feel the powerful oppressive force originating from that side through the dark and blurred spatial cracks. This is troublesome. He couldn't help but be a little staggered. After roughly understanding the purpose of the rift monsters, Nolan himself currently had no way to deal with it. He could only return and inform Lumen and Paimon of what he had seen. What? Paimon exclaimed in surprise when she heard that a dangerous big guy was coming, then asked in confusion, is there any way to stop them from further enlarging that space rift? Their numbers here are already considerable, plus those who haven't returned yet. Acting rashly will only put ourselves in danger. Lumen shook her head, her golden hair swaying along. Well, it's not without a solution. I can use my bow and arrow to harass them from afar. Maybe I can delay the time when the spatial rift fully opens up. Nolan pondered for a moment and simply stated his thoughts. At his current level, his arrow of world's descent could instantly travel a distance of 300 meters before the arrow reappeared and continued its normal flight. During this process, the arrow's kinetic energy wouldn't be depleted. Thus, Nolan's maximum shooting range could reach over 500 meters, a distance where it would be difficult for the rift monsters to detect him. Even if they did detect him, he would have enough time to escape invisibly and avoid being surrounded. So, his idea of harassment still had some feasibility. The only difficulty was that he couldn't precisely aim from a distance of 500 meters, whether he hit or missed depended on luck. Chapter 153, Crisis Temporarily Averted. Wow! When did you become so powerful? After hearing Nolan's explanation, both Lumen and Paimon revealed somewhat surprised expressions. Well, after all, I'm also from another world, so it's normal to have slightly better talents like you. Nolan chuckled and ruffled his hair. Hey, it's not like being able to make arrows traverse through space can be explained by having good talent. Lumen's fist pressed against her soft waist as she stared at him with a skeptical look in her ember eyes. Remember how I inexplicably gained control over the wind elemental power before? I think it's probably a similar situation now. Nolan said with a smile. Well, it seems like you people from other worlds are a bit similar. Lumen also doesn't know why she can control elemental power just by touching the statue of 7 Archons, and that power to purified Valen. Paimon nodded, feeling like she had figured something out. Seeing Paimon's genuine belief, Lumen couldn't help but facepalm, but she knew that everyone had their own secrets, and prying too much would strain their relationship. Since he was her friend, there should be enough trust between them, just like how Nolan didn't inquire about her specific background. Lumen has developed good feeling towards you, obtained 120 affection points. Current affection level, LV6, 45/600. Nolan glanced at the notification that popped up in the character panel, slightly taken aback. It seemed like Lumen was pondering something in her mind. All right, regarding the harassment operation. Well, if you're confident, then there's no harm in giving it a try. Lumen reconsidered Nolan's idea and agreed. As for the aiming issue, leave it to me, Paimon. After all, I can fly high and see far. I can tell you which direction has more monsters, and you'll definitely hit one with a single arrow. Paimon, with the crown floating above her head, patted her chest proudly. That seems to make sense. Nolan nodded thoughtfully. Lumen tousled the ends of her earlobe-length hair and smiled, revealing her fair ears. No time to waste. Let's find a sufficiently distant and concealed sniper position now. It didn't take long for Nolan and others to find a small forest, where they could only barely see the rift monster's side. The advantage here lies in having enough vegetation cover, so they wouldn't stand out like they would on an open grassy field, easily spotted at a glance. Paimon, it's your turn. Fly higher and check if my aim is correct, okay? Nolan, crouching behind a low thicket with his adventurer hunting bow, signaled to the small, fluffy Paimon floating next to the golden-haired girl. Hehe, leave it to me. Paimon exclaimed excitedly before soaring into the sky. She flew straight towards the rift monsters in the direction Nolan aimed, finding herself directly above the midpoint of the spatial rift. The angle of the aim seemed slightly off, with no monsters present at this point. They were all at the edge, tearing the spatial crack wider. Paimon quickly returned, prompting Nolan to adjust the angle of his arrow slightly downward, and he naturally did as she told. "That's right, I feel that this angle is about right, it will definitely hit one," Paimon said confidently. Lumen crouched down, tucking her skirt between the calves enveloped in knee-high boots and the exposed snow-white skin of her thighs. She settled her soft buttocks on her heels and smiled, saying, "Paimon finally gets to help, and that's great. I'm pleased." "Ugh, what's your deal, hey? Haven't I always helped you with the excess food you can't finish?" Paimon huffed, turning her face away to show an expression of "I'm angry." "That's because you looked greedy, so I gave it to you." Lumen leaned her elbow on her knee, her fair palm supporting her chin, and a slight smirk gracing her lips. Nolan listened to the sudden argument between the two, finding it somewhat amusing, but his hands didn't stop moving. The elemental energy consumed by the delusion yesterday had once again replenished. With Nolan's intention, they slowly released and attached to the arrow of the bow. He released his fingers holding the bowstring. The crimson arrow instantly ignored the spatial distance of 300 meters, continuing at an invisible and swift pace to embed itself on the edge of the spatial rift where a group of rift-hound whelps were eroding the boundary of Teyvat's space. With the secret art skill Arrow of World's Descent, it pierced through without the slightest delay. Defeated a powerful enemy, obtained 625 Adventure Express. With the prompt popping up on the character panel, Nolan understood that he had successfully hit his target. He smiled and said to Paimon, "Paimon, go and see what's happening over there." "Okay, since my contribution is so significant today, you and the traveler must make something delicious for me later." Paimon floated into the air, making her request while she flew. "Of course, no problem," Nolan thought to himself, feeling that Paimon was indeed easily satisfied as long as there was food. Shortly after, Paimon returned with the intelligence from the scene. As expected, the death of a rift-hound whelp had indeed alerted the group of monsters, but since they were hiding too far away, the monsters couldn't find them for the time being. After causing a brief commotion, the rift monsters had no choice but to resume their space erosion. "Hehe, I also noticed that when the monsters stopped eroding the spatial crack, it began to slowly repair itself. So, as long as we continue to harass them, we might actually disrupt their plans," Paimon said excitedly, waving her arms and legs in mid-air. "Oh? That's a bit unexpected," Lumen said, the ribbon hanging around her neck fluttering in the breeze, resting on Nolan's arm. "Well, the rift monsters were eroding the space border between the Teyvat world and the rift realm, and it was normal for them to be able to repair themselves when damaged. Otherwise, with so many rift monsters releasing erosion power into Teyvat every day, it would have been riddled with holes long ago," Nolan thought to himself as he tucked the ribbon hanging from his arm back to Lumen. Next, the three of them continued to harass the rift monsters in this manner. Initially, to prevent the spatial rift from being repaired, the monsters didn't dare to stray too far in search of enemies after failing to find them. But when the 10th rift monster was killed, the cunning pack of rift wolves realized that unless they found the assailant shooting from the shadows, they would eventually be nibbled away bit by bit. Angry and with no other choice, they mobilized all their forces to search for any potential enemies from all directions. Seeing the situation, Nolan and the others realized they had angered the wolf pack and quickly fled to meet up with Fiskal and the others. If they were surrounded and couldn't resolve the situation as soon as possible, not to mention the continuous onslaught of hundreds of rift wolves that would follow, even being torn in half wouldn't be enough for them to escape. Chapter 154, Trial Grounds of the Northern Wind. Wolvendom. The withered grass and swirling dust beneath their feet. Nolan and the others dashed forward. Two of them dashed while Paimon was flying wildly. Anyway, in order to avoid the search of the rift monsters, as well as in order to meet up with the others, they quickly ran in the direction where Fiskal and the others were moving. "Did we bite off more than we could chew? Why are they all chasing us so fiercely?" Paimon, hands covering her crown on head to prevent it from falling, panted. "Don't worry, they haven't spotted us yet. As long as we run fast, they won't catch up." Lumen's legs, encased in over-the-knee white boots, swiftly moved, her skirt swaying in the rushing wind, revealing lantern shorts and snow-white thighs. "They've all mobilized at once. As long as the space rift remains untouched, I believe it will repair itself soon." Nolan, relying on his powerful lung capacity, felt no need to gasp for air. In that case, it won't be easy for them to mess with it again anytime soon. If opening the boundary between the Rift Realm and Teyvat was that simple for them, then Nolan and the others wouldn't need to intervene, the Golden Wolf Lord and more Rift monsters would have already crossed over long ago. As for the Rift monsters that appeared in the Wolvendom today, they were probably the vanguard sent over by the realm. Their main task would probably be to cooperate with the Rift Realm on Teyvat's side to expand the spatial rift together, which would probably increase a lot in terms of efficiency. Well, it seems like we've achieved something. Lumen's backless dress fabric wrapped around her softly swaying curves as she glanced at Paimon beside her, seeming a bit tired. She asked, "Paimon, if you're tired, you can ride on my neck." Sniff. "Traveler, you're so kind." Paimon, already exhausted, was almost moved to tears by Lumen's words. She flew directly to Lumen's back and straddled her neck, then slumped onto her head with golden locks, finally able to relax. Nolan watched them with a sense of amusement. About 10 minutes later, they arrived at a hill where they spotted a raven flying high in the sky. Nolan waved at it. Soon, Hounds also spotted the trio and swooped down and said, "How's the operation going, guys?" "It's been smooth, but we've also angered those creatures. Where is the princess and the others are? We need to leave Wolvendom quickly," Nolan said as he briefly explained some of the things that happened just now. "Yeah, this is really troublesome." Hounds, who was flapping his night-colored wings, nodded. "Miss and others are just ahead, please follow me." Descending the hill, Nolan and the others saw Fiskal's group and 2 grey wolves by a small stream. Fiskal sat on a smooth stone by the stream, her notebook resting on her legs wrapped in asymmetric semi-transparent black stockings as she recorded the gathered intelligence. Her bright green pupils flickered as she looked at the others, speaking with some confusion. "Oh, attendants and traveler, why the hurry? The mission went relatively smoothly, but we've angered those creatures. We should retreat first and discuss further later," Nolan chuckled and said. Fiskal's fair, delicate face directly faced herself as she slightly tilted her head. She nodded, putting away the notes on the investigation. With her buttocks clad in a triangular black stockings bodysuit lifted off the smooth stone surface, she stood up and said, "Indeed, as expected of the attendant of this princess, I presume you've exceeded my expectations." At that moment, the 2 grey wolves drinking by the stream suddenly raised their heads, glaring fiercely towards the grass-covered hills. Razor, with a few strands of grey hair peeking out from under his hood, immediately warned, "Be careful. They're coming." "What's coming?" Bennett, who had just washed his face and got his fingers pinched by a crab in the stream, followed their gaze towards the hills, where a pack of rift hounds led by some whelps emerged. "Wow, did they follow the scent?" Paimon, lying on Lumen's head, exclaimed in surprise. Fiskal crossed her arms, slightly puffing up her chest, and said, "Humph, just a few black evil wolves. Let the holy judgment of this princess's thunder smite them. Miss, I think it's better to retreat first. There are many more gathering behind them." Hounds, the night raven flying overhead, observed the other creatures slowly approaching from the hills and reminded them. "In that case, what are we waiting for? Let's run." Paimon urged anxiously, not wanting to become the monster's meal. No more words needed, the temporary adventure team, along with the 2 wolves, all started running. Hounds surveyed the surroundings from high above, guiding them in the right direction. "Wow, they're fast." Through Hounds' vision, Fiskal saw the group of monsters swiftly approaching through space rifts. If they continued like this, they would easily be caught, thus falling into a surrounded predicament. "Razon, is there a relatively safe place nearby, where we can escape and take cover for a moment?" Bennett asked the wolf boy next to him, who was quite familiar with the Wolvendom environment. At the same time, he accidentally stumbled over a protruding stone on the ground, staggering for a moment, nearly falling. "Whoa, that was dangerous." He patted his chest, his face showing a lingering expression of fear. Feeling the strong wind rushing against them as they ran, Razor contemplated for a moment, then nodded. "There is safe place. Follow me." He increased his speed and raced ahead of Fiskal to take the lead, observing the surroundings and sniffing twice before saying, "This way." "All right." Following Razor, they diverted their path, and in their rear view, they could faintly see the black silhouettes of the rift wolves. Trees flew past their peripheral vision, and after a while, they finally arrived at the safe place Razor had mentioned. In front of them was the remains of an oversized circular pit building constructed of stone like a bull ring. "This is..." Nolan halted, looking surprised at the huge pit structure before him. If he remembered correctly, this seemed to be the trial ground of Andrius, the Wolf of the North, who guarded Wolvendom. In other words, it was the Lupus Boreas from the game. This is safe. Razor stood on the edge of the pit structure and said. Safe? But there's nothing here, right? Paimon, floating beside Lumen, shrugged with some confusion. In her eyes, it was just a particularly large pit structure, with no hiding places nearby. Perhaps it was even more dangerous here. Chapter 155, Andrius. Razor shouldn't deceive us. I can sense very strong and pure elemental traces here. Nolan spoke of what he had observed. Since they were here, with Razor and the two grey wolves by their side, they believed the Wolf of the North wouldn't stand idly by. Humph, is it that inferior version of yours golden eyes that impersonates this princess again? Fiscal pressed her hands against her soft waist, leaning slightly forward with a proud gaze mixed with a hint of envy in her golden eyes. Why does a mere attendant possess such handsome abilities? It's truly the manifestation of her ideal grand illusory vision of all-encompassing madness and judgment eye of judgment. Nolan looked at Fiscal, who looked quite interested on her face, couldn't help but raise his index finger and flick her forehead, which was covered by her blonde hair, and said with a smile. As compensation for being a pirated copy, I'll tell you how to acquire this ability when we have the time. Ugh, you pesky attendant dares to be insolent. Fiscal covered her forehead, a displeased expression on her fair face. You'd better be telling the truth, or this princess won't spare you. The monsters are coming. Lumen suddenly sensed something and turned her body to look back along the path they had come. Sure enough, the Black Rift Hounds were following the scent of their fallen comrades, their numbers enough to tear everyone present to shreds in an instant. Why are there so many? Paimon cowered behind Lumen in fear. Haha, indeed, even though I've had my share of bad luck, this is the first time I've encountered such a situation. Bennett rubbed the back of his head, looking somewhat helpless. Faced with this situation, he couldn't muster any fighting spirit. With so many monsters, and they were still very powerful. With a significant numerical advantage, the Rift monsters had no interest in encroaching step by step. Right now, they just wanted to tear apart the humans in front of them. The next moment, the front portion of the Rift monsters vanished instantly, sinking into the depths of space, while some remained behind to prevent Nolan's group from escaping. Let's jump down. Nolan didn't hesitate, leaping into the massive pit structure along with everyone else. At that time, the Rift monsters that performed spatial shuttling also appeared at their original location, and with a clawed pounce, they watched the humans escaping and hurriedly continued to chase after them. They resembled a black waterfall cascading into the pit. Razor and the two grey wolves suddenly halted, turning to face the approaching monsters behind them, baring their teeth. Oi! Why are you stopping? Hurry, run! Paimon urged anxiously. Well, maybe we don't need to run anymore. Nolan just realized that the pit structure was slowly enveloped in mist. Having played the game before, Nolan naturally understood what would happen next. Hey, what's going on? Bennett, Fiscal, and Lumen also noticed the unusual surroundings and stopped, their expressions tinged with some surprise and suspicion. Why did you bring humans here? A calm yet majestic voice abruptly echoed in the pit structure. Who's there? Stop playing tricks, Paimon isn't afraid of you. Paimon, hiding behind Lumen, was visibly startled, then gritted her teeth and said defiantly. The golden-haired girl in a white dress, revealing her snow-white back, also looked around vigilantly with amber eyes. Nolan glanced around, feeling a sudden chill down his spine. As he turned back, he saw, amidst the endless mist, a pair of huge eyes emitting blue flowing light, flickering momentarily. That is. Just as Nolan was perplexed, he suddenly heard a thud behind him and quickly turned back. A huge, blue-white, fantasy-like wolf king fell from the sky and stepped on the rift monster group that was confronting Razor and the two grey wolves. Endless ice elements blossomed, instantly turning each rift monsters that sank into the depths of space into ice sculptures. Then with a tremor of its hind feet, all the ice sculptures instantly turned into powder that floated away in the wind. Oh my, miss, that looks like quite an extraordinary presence, Hounds, flapping his wings, remarked with some astonishment. Fiscal, her legs clad in asymmetric black stockings, felt a chill and instinctively drew them closer, crossing her arms as she spoke. So, this giant wolf is the reason that Wolf Boy claimed this place would be safe. She had thought that the safe place Razor mentioned would be inaccessible to the monsters, but she hadn't expected a giant wolf to suddenly appear and defeat all their enemies with just a single strike. Because, they help us, they are, good people. Razor, the wolf boy, looked at the Wolf King and explained. Humph. The Northwind Wolf King, Andrius, swept a dignified glance over Razor and the two grey wolves, then turned to Nolan and the others. You seem to have a decent lineup. Are you ready for the trial? Trial? What trial? Paimon, no longer as afraid after learning that the Wolf King and Razor knew each other, asked. As humans who have received my help without undergoing a trial, it's only fair to make up for that, the Northwind Wolf King huffed coldly. This is allowed. Nolan was taken aback, not expecting the Northwind Wolf King to be so particular. Indeed, this was the Northwind Wolf King's trial ground. Generally, besides the wolf pack of Wolvendom, it wasn't easy for others to get its help. But accepting its trial was possible, and if they won, the Northwind Wolf King wouldn't be stingy with its reward. But we don't have anyone here who can defeat you, do we? Lumen's fair hands clenched at her waist as she looked calmly at the Northwind Wolf King. You'll face me together, and I'll adjust my strength to match yours, the tall and majestic blue and white Northwind Wolf King said, opening its mouth. Humph, as the princess of the Amernachtriuk, I've never failed in battles across many realms. Do you think I, the Condemnation Princess, ruler of the Ashen Darkness, would fear a mere trial? Fiskal's skirt gently brushed against her legs encased in black stockings as she confidently hugged her chest. The Northwind Wolf King glanced at her. Everyone who comes for the trial says similar things. Since that's the case, let's begin, Nolan nodded. Since they had accepted help, it was only right to abide by the rules. Of course, the main reason was that he knew even if the trial failed, they would at most suffer some injuries. As one of the Four Winds Guardians, the Northwind Wolf King, Andrius wouldn't harm their lives any more than that. Only 4 people participated in the Northwind Wolf King's trial, Nolan, Bennett, Lumen, and Fiskal. Razor was acknowledged as a Lupical asterisk, so he didn't need to participate. As for Paimon, well, she is just an unarmed emergency food, helpless and powerless. Chapter 156, Hidden in the Mist. In Wolvendom, the Northwind Trial Grounds. Razor and the 2 grey wolves crouched at the edge of the large pit-like ruin, their eyes fixed on the impending trial below. Paimon floated in mid-air, holding a paper bag of potato fries bought from the Good Hunters, occasionally dipping her hand in to eat, leaving crumbs all over her mouth. She wiped the corner of her mouth, tilting her head in puzzlement. Razor, do you think the travelers and others stand a chance? It is strong. No one can defeat it, the grey-haired youth with a hood shook his head, not particularly optimistic about their chances. Although the Northwind Wolf King can indeed defeat so many monsters with a single blow, didn't it say it would lower its strength? So I do believe that Traveler and the others can defeat it. Paimon said with a smile on her small face as she licked her fingers that were covered in oil and crumbled potato chips. She had confidence in everyone. Are you ready for the trial? The Northwind Wolf King gazed at the 4 humans before it, its eyes seemingly emitting a faint glow. Level 40. Nolan's golden eyes met the gaze of the Northwind Wolf King, noticing that its level had gradually fallen within the range he could perceive, from a string of question marks earlier. Among them, he was level 30, Bennett 35, Fiskal had recently reached 38, and finally Lumen was at 40. So it wasn't hard to guess that the Northwind Wolf King was adjusting its strength based on the strongest present. If the Northwind Wolf King was a typical monster of the same level, Lumen could likely defeat it, and Nolan could probably manage to win. However, the essence of the Wolf King was a demon god, although it was only a remnant soul, it was not something that could be compared to ordinary creatures. Therefore, the upcoming trial would undoubtedly be an exceptionally difficult one, and they could only do their best. For Nolan, he didn't want to face an opponent much stronger than himself. After all, he wasn't someone who enjoyed seeking trouble. Humph, this princess has long been ready. Fiskal swung her right hand clad in black silk gloves, and a purple longbow appeared in her hand. Lumen and Bennett also took out their long swords, ready for battle. After some thought, Nolan finally decided to take out his bow and arrows. After all, his archery skills were stronger now. As the group prepared, the mist on the scene thickened. The Northwind Wolf King had disappeared from their sight at some point. Hounds, fly higher. Fiskal, with her long golden hair, kept her right eye, uncovered by the black eye patch, vigilantly on the lookout. After not seeing anything, she instructed her familiar, the night raven Hounds, to fly higher and see if it could spot anything. "All right, miss." Night raven Hounds quickly flapped his wings, yet even from above, the sight remained a haze of icy mist. Tap, 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 like the sound of running footsteps. Because the mist was formed by elemental forces, with it pervading the entire battlefield, it did indeed cause some interference for Nolan's golden eyes of judgment and Lumen's elemental sight. After all, both of them had the ability to observe elemental traces, but now, upon activating their abilities, they found their entire field of vision filled with ice elemental energy. It became like being blind, less useful than their naked eyes. Fortunately, Nolan's ability to locate by sound was quite good, allowing him to clearly perceive that the Northwind Wolf King was circling the trial ground, searching for an opportunity to attack. Nolan released the fire elemental energy from his delusion and attached it to an arrow, then quickly predicted and shot towards the left. The fire elemental arrow disappeared into space the moment it entered. The puzzled voice of the Northwind Wolf King rang out, followed by a somewhat approving tone. "To wound me in such a disadvantaged environment, you indeed have some skill." "Hat, you flatter me," Nolan chuckled. Just then, the Northwind Wolf King halted its running footsteps and slightly manipulated the ice elemental energy, creating a path of ice extending towards Nolan and his companions. "Be careful, dodge quickly." Lumen bent her knees slightly, her white high-heeled boots encasing her knees revealing soft and distinct lines, while simultaneously warning them. The reactions of Nolan and the others were equally swift, dodging the path of ice in less than a second. Subsequently, the Northwind Wolf King charged along the path of ice. Fortunately, everyone had dodged it in advance. After the charge, the Northwind Wolf King once again vanished into the mist and resumed its run. Fiskal also attempted to predict the position and shot a lightning elemental arrow, but unfortunately, it was dodged effortlessly due to its slower speed. Not long after, another path of ice spread out. Once again, the four dodged the Northwind Wolf King's charge. Nolan still had some energy left and shot a fire elemental arrow, successfully hitting the Wolf King's tail. Flames erupted, causing it to grunt in discomfort. "With this mist, it's difficult for us to attack it," Bennett said, holding his dark steel sword, ready to strike at any moment. "Stay vigilant." "It can't do anything to us now," Lumen said, always paying attention to the direction of the Wolf King's footsteps. A large amount of wind elemental energy gathered in her fair palm, forming a huge vortex. She was trying to pull the ice mist around her that was affecting her vision and make them concentrate in her hand. Clearly, it was effective. Nolan watched as the thick ice mist flowed towards her, and soon after, the dense mist became much thinner. The silhouette of the Northwind Wolf King became visible. By doing this, you're only restricting yourself," the Northwind Wolf King said, its gaze flashing as a path of ice extended towards Lumen. As the Wolf King said, at this moment, because she had forcibly gathered a large amount of ice elemental energy using wind elemental energy, she couldn't move freely. If she wasn't careful, all the ice elemental energy would explode and hurt her. "Quick, throw them out." Nolan saw the Wolf King about to charge again, this time targeting Lumen, and quickly reminded her. I can't control them anymore." Lumen also didn't expect that after forcibly absorbing the ice elemental energy, it would be so difficult to control. Now, she could only continuously maintain the rotation of the vortex to continue drawing in the ice elemental energy. If she stopped, the ice mist ball in her hand would explode instantly. She would be the first to be affected and engulfed. "Human, it seems you're the first one to be eliminated." The Northwind Wolf King chuckled lightly, its agile limbs suddenly leaping towards the girl with golden short hair. "Ounce." Fiskal's fair face showed a hint of urgency as she summoned Ounce to appear by the side of the Wolf King, spitting out a magical thunder bullet that hit its body. Chapter 157, Awoo. Nolan watched as neither of their attacks seemed to have any effect on the Northwind Wolf King. His legs tensed, and just as it was about to collide with Lumen, he leaped forward, pushing her away. Lumen felt her shoulder, exposed by her white dress, being grabbed, and then she was pushed to the side. With the ice mist ball no longer restrained by the wind element, it suddenly exploded. The tremendous force slammed into Nolan's back, greatly increasing his speed. Then, uncontrollably, he crashed into Lumen's arms. The extremely cold sensation from the ice elemental damage to his back was about to pass into his mind when it was washed away by the warm soft impact and suffocating sensation felt on his face. Bang! Lumen's back slammed directly into the wall of the pit ruins, causing several cracks to appear on the wall due to her impact. Ah! Feeling the pain in her back, Lumen also felt a slight pressure on her chest. She slightly opened her eyes and found Nolan lying on top of her chest. Hey, are you okay? As the two slid down from the wall, Lumen patted Nolan, who was lying on her chest, a hint of concern showing in her ember eyes. She knew that Nolan, who was in front of her, had suffered the main damage from the ice elemental explosion, hence her question. Nolan pressed against her soft white shoulders to push himself away, shaking his head slightly as his head became somewhat groggy from the suffocation and explosive impact. He took a deep breath, slightly relieved and said, "I'm fine. It doesn't affect the fight." That's good." Lumen used her fair right hand to adjust the slightly loose black anti-slip belt on her dress, lifting and tightening the sides of her chest a bit. Hearing Nolan's words, she nodded, relieved, and said, "Why yes. Lumen has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 210 affection points. Current affection level, LV.6, 255/600. As the ice mist dissipated significantly throughout the arena, the Northwind Wolf King could no longer hide, so it changed its combat tactics. Andrius leaped into the air, then descended towards the two who had just been blasted away. In its observation, although Nolan's strength was not as great as that of the girl with the golden short hair, he posed the greatest threat to it. After all, that girl used the power of wind element, and it was immune to damage from both ice and wind elements. This is determined by its very nature, not considered cheating. And that young man's fire elemental arrow was just too fast. At its current level of strength, it couldn't dodge it. So, it's basically confirmed that he's the main damage dealer of this trial team. Once he's out, the rest won't have the ability to fight back. Let these young adventurers suffer a bit more. Nolan and Lumen watched as the Northwind Wolf King used the same move that defeated the Rift monsters with one blow, and hurriedly left their spot. Sure enough, as soon as the Wolf King landed, that spot quickly froze over. Lumen, carrying the dull blade, took advantage of its immobility to swiftly dash past with her delicate legs, clad in over-the-knee high-heeled boots, while the sword blade slowly spun, creating a cyclone of green wind. Hounds, in the sky, also quickly spat out a bolt of lightning magic. At the back, Fiscal, with one hand holding the bow and the other pinching the string, extended and raised her arm covered in black silk fabric, faintly revealing her snow-white armpits. She began continuously shooting lightning element arrows at the Northwind Wolf King. Ha! Bennett also rushed to the front of the Wolf King, using the elemental combat skill Passionate Overload to stab at its huge wolf claw. Faced with attacks coming from all directions, the Northwind Wolf King first kicked Bennett away with a hind leg, then blocked the thunder bullets and lightning arrows with its waist. Lumen's sword, imbued with wind element, stabbed at its head, but had no effect. Crap! She realized she had been tricked. The Northwind Wolf King intentionally exposed a flaw to her. It's too late now. The Northwind Wolf King's tail, long prepared, instantly swung back from behind, wrapping around Lumen, who was suspended in midair with nowhere to leverage. Oh no, the traveler's been caught. Paimon, who had stopped chewing on her potato fries, looked worried. Seeing this, Nolan immediately fired a fire elemental arrow. He didn't aim at the Northwind Wolf King but at the dull blade entangled with the hurricane on its head. In the next moment, the arrow suddenly appeared on the sword. The hurricane suddenly spread the flames above its head. Feeling the burning pain in its head, the dignified gaze of the Northwind Wolf King froze on the young adventurer for a moment, and Nolan felt a sudden freeze, almost uncontrollably stiffening. Not bad, kid, catch this. The tail of the Northwind Wolf King, treating Lumen as a projectile, slightly gathered strength and flung her towards him. Ah! Lumen was launched like a missile, and Nolan wanted to catch her, but his body felt somewhat frozen, unable to even lift his hand. What kind of strange ability is this again? As a result, he could only watch as Lumen's headbutt hit his abdomen, then flew up again, smashing into the wall of the ruins. Ah, attendant, traveler. Fiscal's fair face showed a worried expression as she continued to shoot arrows at the Northwind Wolf King. I'm fine. Nolan leaned against the wall and slid down, kneeling on one knee and holding his stomach, forcing a smile. I just almost threw up last week's meal. Cough, cough. Didn't you say you were at the same level as us in terms of strength? How can it be this strong? Lumen, kneeling on the ground with her palms, coughed lightly, the white hem of her dress hanging down on her soft calves wrapped in boots. Maybe it's something like a storm terror level existence, who knows? Nolan rubbed his stomach and stood up. In that case, even if it's level 20, it might easily defeat several people. The Northwind Wolf King's close combat ability is too strong. Next, you and Bennett don't approach it. Let me and Princess use our bows and arrows to consume its strength. He thought for a moment and continued. Okay, I'll activate the elemental burst to empower you. Bennett, who had been kicked away earlier, approached and nodded. Do you really think my trial would be that simple? Although the Northwind Wolf King seemed to be overpowering the adventure team, their attacks still had an effect on it. After all, it's now in a state of suppressing its own strength. Elemental resistance, physical defense, and the like have all been reduced. Otherwise, if you just stand there and get beaten without being able to fight back, what's the point of the trial? You guys have some skills, but you still have a ways to go to pass the trial. The Northwind Wolf King opened its mouth. Let's see if you can withstand this next attack. If you can, I'll consider it a pass. What? Nolan and the others were slightly surprised. Woo! Before they could continue to be amazed, the Northwind Wolf King howled to the sky, endless wind and ice elements converging on it, dyeing its entire body blue. Following this, the entire trial ground was engulfed in a storm of wind and hail. Chapter 158, Lord Lady. Mondstadt City, the Goth Grand Hotel. The entire hotel here has been reserved by the diplomatic delegation from Snezhnia. Currently, in the luxurious suite on the top floor, a lady wearing a black lace mask covering half of her face looked out the window at the street below, gently swirling the red liquid in her tall glass. She took a sip of the wine, parted her rosy lips, and said in a somewhat indifferent tone, "What's the matter with you, Anastasia? Not only did you fail to take advantage of that stupid dragon's madness and pressure the Knights of Favonius, but you also let them turn the tables on us and demand an explanation. It's rather disappointing." The Fatui's diplomatic delegation, Anastasia, also wearing a black mask, stood in the corner of the room near the door, slightly bowing as she spoke. "Apologies, Lord Lady, we made a mistake when retrieving the Holy Lyre to Himmel. However, we have discovered that the Holy Lyre is currently in the hands of a young bard, and since both the Knights of Favonius and the Church are comfortable letting him hold that treasure, then..." "Interesting." Rosalina Kruzichka Lohe falter, dressed in a black and white dress, with her snow-white slender legs slightly exposed between the hem and the front of the skirt. She snorted coldly and said, "Find his whereabouts and let me know." "Yes, Lord Lady." Anastasia nodded, then continued, "The Knights of Favonius have demanded an explanation from us regarding the theft of the Holy Lyre to Himmel. How should we proceed? There is also that Electro-Chechen mage that they captured. The guy who accomplishes nothing and loses everything. Just say she's an imposter, we don't know her." Rosalind's right hand, clad in black gloves, rested under her chest, and the tall glass tilted, causing the red liquid inside to shimmer along the rim, reflecting the sunlight coming in through the window. "I understand." Anastasia nodded without any surprise. After all, as a soldier of the Fatui's diplomatic delegation, she had to demonstrate her own value no matter what. Since the mission has already failed, there's no need to cause any more trouble for the organization. As for whether the Knights of Favonius believe this childish excuse or not, it doesn't matter. They're just showing their stance. If they say it's not true, then it's not true. Even if they produce evidence, what can they do? They can just claim it's deeply fabricated, and they've got the Knights of Favonius on the back foot. Wolvendom, trial area. Wind blades and huge hailstones raged across the entire arena. Nolan couldn't even dodge, let alone counterattack. Dodge the wind blade, and the hailstorm from above comes crashing down. Dodge the hailstorm, and the wind blade comes right after. In the end, it was Bennett who gathered enough elemental energy to unleash an elemental burst, and the group endured the Northwind Wolf King's blizzard skill by huddling together. Nolan and Bennett, who were at the forefront, had clothes that looked like they had been gnawed by dogs, barely hanging on to their bodies. And the two girls behind them, thanks to most of the wind blades being blocked by them in front, still looked decent. As for the Night Raven Ounce, to avoid being attacked, he had already been summoned back by Fiscal. "Oh? You actually managed to block it? That's a bit unexpected," said the Northwind Wolf King, Andrius, with a slight hint of surprise, as he reverted back to his blue and white dreamy appearance. "Phew, so does that mean we passed the trial?" Bennett flashed a brilliant smile, speaking with a tone of excitement. According to what I said earlier, being able to withstand this attack indeed counts as passing the trial, replied the Northwind Wolf King without much hesitation. Although these individuals didn't defeat it head-on, their performance was begrudgingly acknowledged. Hearing the Northwind Wolf King's words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. After fighting for so long, they had realized that they couldn't defeat it. Continuing to fight would only result in them getting beaten up. Hee, that's great. In that case, what you did to help us just now is considered even. Paimon eagerly flew in from outside the battlefield, speaking. The Northwind Wolf King glanced at the little guy and nodded, saying, naturally. Besides, since you've passed the trial, consider these items as rewards. With a wave of its hand, some objects resembling colored crystal pieces appeared in front of them, including something that looked like a sword. Is this the prototype of a Northland one-handed sword? Bennett exclaimed excitedly as he looked at the sword-shaped object. A prototype? What's that? Lumen asked, her face showing confusion as she tousled her golden hair. It seems to be the main material for forging 4-star weapons, said to be extremely rare. That's why blacksmiths rarely sell 4-star weapons, the weapon prototypes are too scarce, explained Bennett. I see. Lumen nodded knowingly, then as if recalling something, she said, yesterday, when I met you at the blacksmith's shop, the old man mentioned that your original sword was almost beyond repair. Now, you can ask him to forge a 4-star quality weapon for you. Hey, is it really okay to give me something so precious? Bennett exclaimed in surprise. Although he did want a 4-star weapon, this was a valuable reward obtained through everyone's efforts, and he didn't want to take it for himself. Lumen is right. If it weren't for your elemental burst, we wouldn't have been able to pass the trial. You deserve this, Nolan said with a smile. Humph, stupid attendant, if they say you should take it, then take it. Stop being so hesitant, Fiscal said, crossing her arms wrapped in black silk gloves. You guys are so kind to me. Bennett was moved to the point of tears. Suddenly, he felt like he was also lucky sometimes. For example, meeting this group of good friends. In addition to the prototype of the one-handed sword, there were other elemental materials that could be used for Ascends, 3-star quality pieces of the Agnitus agate fragment, which just so happened to be 2 pieces for each for Lumen, Nolan, and Fiscal. After they distributed the loot, the Northwind Wolf King continued, aren't you investigating those foreign black wolf monsters? I have some information that I can share with you. As an existence guarding the Wolvendom, Andrius naturally didn't want his territory to have those creatures that would threaten the local wolves and residents of Mondstadt. Oh, do you know where they came from? That's great, if you know, then we don't have to continue investigating. Paimon, floating in the air, said cheerfully. Nolan and the others also looked at the giant wolf with some curiosity. The Northwind Wolf King didn't beat around the bush either, lightly tapping his wolf head as he explained, those creatures come from a rift realm called the Abyss, created by the Gold, they were the vanguard of the war once upon a time. Chapter 159, Whoosh back to Mondstadt. Rift Realm? The Abyss? Gold? War? What are these things? Paimon rubbed her chin with the back of her hand, looking puzzled. The Northwind Wolf King, Andrius, briefly explained about the Abyss Realm and a story involving an alchemist called Gold. He then continued. As for the war, it is related to the fallen kingdom of Kenri 500 years ago. The Gold Rhindottir was the chief alchemist of that kingdom. She researched alchemy to an incredible depth, but she also birthed disasters that caused varying degrees of damage to all 7 nations. Is the disaster referring to those rift monsters? Bennett scratched his head. He had a deep impression of the danger posed by the rift monsters. If many of them appeared, it would indeed be a disaster. No, it's just one aspect of it. They are likely here to continue invading Teyvat. Before they grow stronger, it's best to eliminate them as soon as possible. Well, I should go, if you guys want to know the specifics go check the history. With that, the Northwind Wolf King slowly faded away before their eyes. It left quite quickly, Paimon said, shrugging helplessly. Well, now that the matter of the rift monsters has been investigated, let's go back and submit our quests first. After all, the Wolvendom does still have a lot of rift monsters scattered about, and it really needs to be cleared of them as soon as possible. Nolan nodded and said. He had some understanding of the fall of Kenri from the game's plot. Of course, it was only surface-level knowledge, Andrius definitely knew more since he had experienced it firsthand. Yes, previously they tried to dissolve the boundary of the world to let their powerful ones come over. Although Nolan and I barely stopped them, if left unchecked, the rift monsters will soon try to open spatial rifts again. A slightly worried look appeared on Lumen's fair face. Then let's go, Bennett said. By the way, do you guys know if there are any of those strange devices nearby? The kind that's in the street above Fountain Square. Paimon, who had a crown suspended from her head, asked as she put her hands behind her back. Oh, those strange devices, hey? I don't really pay much attention to it, even though I do come over to the Wolvendom for adventures quite occasionally. The youth with ash golden hair shook his head. This princess isn't quite sure what you're looking for in something like that, Paimon. Fiscal, with her hands resting beneath the soft fabric of her black silk bodysuit, her bright green pupils showing a hint of puzzlement, asked. Hee. Because they are actually teleportation devices, and the traveler knows how to use them. Once we find one, we can whoosh back to Mondstadt, Paimon explained. Yeah, that's right, Lumen nodded slightly, affirming the statement. Is that so? Both Fiscal and Bennett looked extremely surprised. This shattered their long-held beliefs. After all, when they saw it around when they were kids, they'd wondered about it and asked the elders of the family who didn't know about it, so they quickly became accustomed to it. And subconsciously labeled them as useless devices. Therefore, hearing that they were actually teleportation devices came as a big surprise to them. What, you, said, no. Razor said as he walked over to the ground with the two grey wolves. Hey, Razor, oh, right, you live in Wolvendom, so it's normal for you to know. Paimon was first puzzled, then tapped her head before realizing and said apologetically. Then, could you please take us there, Razor? Although Nolan used teleport waypoints in the game before, he didn't know the specific locations other than the Knight's headquarters rooftop and the memorable one along the streets. After all, which player would bother to remember where the teleport waypoints are, especially since the real-world Teyvat is much larger than in the game. So even if they remembered the locations, they might not necessarily be able to find them. Next, under Razor's guidance, Nolan and the others walked along the path from the trail ground straight to the cider lake. After a long time, they finally saw a device emitting a red light on the slope to the right of the road. Lumen gently touched it with her fair hand, and sure enough, the teleport waypoint floated up from its pedestal, and the red light turned into a clear blue. In this way, it was considered successfully activated. Razor, then we're off. Feel free to come to Mondstadt and play with us sometime, Paimon waved to Razor. Okay. Razor's answer was short and to the point, and as usual, not very good with words. Lumen wanted to bring others with her for teleportation, which required physical contact. So with Paimon and the others, a total of 4 people, it would take 2 trips to teleport everyone back to Mondstadt City. Mondstadt, at the teleport waypoint atop the Knights of Favonius headquarters. After a brief darkness, Nolan and the others returned to Mondstadt very smoothly. This is the Knights headquarters, and over there is the Inmo Archon Plaza. Did we really come back to Mondstadt so easily? Bennett, after experiencing the teleport waypoint, felt greatly shocked. If they could return so conveniently every time they went on an adventure, that would be fantastic. Humph, it's still not as good as the Evernight leap that I used to tour the worlds. Fiscal tried to hide her surprise, then pursed her soft lips, lifted her fair chin proudly, and said. He, in that case Fiscal, when are you going to invite us to the Immernachtreich as your guests? Paimon said jokingly. Lumen, standing on the side wearing knee-high white high-heeled boots, also smiled slightly as she looked at her. They were indeed a pair of mischievous individuals. Ahem, most of the power of this princess was sealed upon arriving in Teyvat, so I can't take you there until the seal is lifted. Fiscal averted her gaze, her words somewhat ambiguous. All right, now that we've arrived at the Knight's headquarters, before we go to the Adventurers Guild to submit the investigation commission, let's first inform the acting Grand Master of what happened over there, Nolan suggested, trying to ease the situation for little Amy. The attendant is right. We'll talk about visiting the Immernachtreich when this princess's seal is lifted. Fiscal, with her hands on her hips, her pale fingers slightly sinking into her soft abdomen covered in black silk, showed great agreement with Nolan's words. Instead of entering the Knights of Favonius through the stairs on the rooftop, Nolan and the others politely landed on the ground using the wind glider and greeted the 2 Favonius knights standing guard before entering through the main entrance. After knocking on the door of the acting Grand Master's office, they found that a visitor was already here. With light golden hair, blue-green pupils, and a fair complexion, the combination was extremely perfect. He was also dressed in the style of the Knights of Favonius. If Nolan remembered correctly, this person seemed to be Albedo, the chief alchemist of the Knights of Favonius. Chapter 160, Lovers, 2 in 1 chapter. Knights of Favonius Headquarters, Acting Grand Master's Office. The sunlight outside illuminated the room brightly, while a gentle breeze carried the fragrance of flowers and grass into the room. Sitting in the chair with a high back, the Acting Grand Master Jean, with her golden ponytail tied behind her head, swayed gently with the breeze. "Thousand wines brought us together. Honorary Knights, what brings you here today?" Grand Master Jean faced Nolan, a strand of hair falling onto her fair nose, visible through the sleeveless uniform of the Knights of Favonius, revealing the snow-white skin beneath. Nolan carefully chose his words and explained in detail about the appearance of the rift monsters in the Wolvendom. "I see." Jean rested her elbow on the desk, the crossed fingers supporting her soft chin. "I heard about this yesterday, but I never imagined they would be so dangerous." "Hey, has Grand Master Jean already heard about it?" "It should be the hunters from Springvale who came to inform you." Paimon floated in the air, swaying her body slightly from side to side with a tone of doubt. "Yet. At the time they brought the carcass of the rift hound you guys were talking about. The hunters said these unseen creatures are very dangerous, so I had a colleague from the Knights of Favonius take the body to the chief alchemist for examination. He has just come to explain the situation." Jean nodded, then turned to the silent young man beside her. "The chief alchemist." Lumen was not unfamiliar with this name, having heard it from the Northwind Wolf King only a short while ago. That gold Rhindottir was also the chief alchemist of the fallen kingdom of Kenria. The silent Albedo raised his hand and nodded in acknowledgement. "Greetings, everyone. I am Albedo. As you are also involved in investigating these rift/abyss creatures, why not listen to the results of my examination of the Rifthound's corpse?" "Hehe, hello, I'm Paimon, the best guide in Teyvat." Paimon waved her hand and said with a smile. "Could it be that there's something else strange about those monsters?" Lumen's amber eyes looked at him, a hint of confusion on her fair face. Albedo crossed his arms and said with a somewhat confirming tone, "Indeed. They are creatures of abyssal blood, and the black blood inside them even possesses the power to dissolve the world. And with such dangerous power originating from another world, they are not tolerated by the world. Before I could delve deeper into my research, that corpse was expelled from this world, leaving behind only a pair of claws. Technically, those claws shouldn't have been left behind either. Upon further examination, I discovered they are alchemical creations of the liquefaction layer, extremely rare, and can be used to upgrade weapons as a substitute for some elemental materials." He simplified the results of his overnight research in a way that ordinary people could easily understand. "Ah, abyssal blood? Liquefaction layer? What are all these? I feel like my head's spinning." Paimon hurriedly covered her head and shook it. "You don't need to understand. Just know that although they are very dangerous, they are also quite valuable," Albedo said briefly. As far as he could remember, those capable of creating such life were few and far between, with the greatest likelihood being his aloof and strict master. However, he didn't say this out loud though. "Well then, the Knights will issue a statement in the next couple of days, warning Mondstadt citizens about the danger in the Wolvendom. The reconnaissance company will return today for rest, and by then, we'll have enough manpower to clear out the monsters." Jean pondered briefly before decisively speaking. The post-disaster reconstruction in Mondstadt and the ongoing monster cleanup in the surrounding areas were unavoidable tasks. "If possible, please have the reconnaissance company collect some claws for me to study," the light blonde-haired Albedo said. "Sure. I'll talk to Eula about it," Jean replied without hesitation. "Then, I'll take my leave." After finishing his business, Albedo left the acting Grand Master's office. Jean turned her gaze back to Nolan and the others, nodding as she spoke, "Thank you very much for bringing the news. I have a lot of work to attend to, so I won't keep you any longer. Jean has developed good feelings towards you, obtained 200 affection points. Current affection level, LV.5, 210/500. Hehe, we're off to submit a commission to the Adventurers Guild next, so after sharing the intel with you, we'll be on our way too." Paimon shook her head playfully, smiling. "Grand Master Jean, please take care of yourself amidst your duties. We'll take our leave now," Nolan expressed his concern before leaving. I understand, thank you for your concern. Jean lightly brushed her fair fingers through her temple, lifting some strands of golden hair to reveal her delicate ears as she smiled. Hey, Catherine, we're back. Passing by the Cat's Tail Tavern, descending the steps from the street, Paimon waved to Catherine, who had no one to attend to. Ad Astra Abyssosk. Welcome back to the Adventurers Guild, and I hope your missions went smoothly. Catherine, in her maid-style dress, clasped her hands in front of her abdomen and slightly bowed, smiling. Hey, why isn't it the usual welcome to the Adventurers Guild? Bennett felt puzzled and scratched his head. Hee. There's no need to be so formal with a few old friends. Catherine maintained her smile, then continued, I believe your commissions went well, right? Sunlight streamed through the eaves, casting a glow on Fiscal's snowy shoulders. She stood with her arms crossed, a proud expression on her face as she said. With this princess's involvement, success was inevitable. As expected of Miss Fiscal. Please, enlighten me on the situation, Catherine said in a gentle tone. Fiscal was very flattered as she took the volume of investigation records out of the vision and handed it to Catherine. She nodded her head lightly. Everything from the basic details to the mission process is recorded in here. Those dark enemies are extremely dangerous. Please ask Uncle Cyrus to raise the level of the monster cleanup commission and remind the adventuring teams not to send rookie adventurers. Okay, understood. Catherine accepted it with both hands, then handed over a bulging cloth bag from behind. This is the reward for your high-level commission. Please accept it. Thank you. Fiscal's expression lit up with happiness. 2 million mora, split between 4 people, meant each of them had 500,000 mora. This made Nolan couldn't help but sigh. The commission fee from this high-level commission was worth half his fortune. So now, with the addition of the mora on him, totaling 1.4 million, he could be called a millionaire. Though it would only be enough to buy a 3-star one-handed sword. After smoothly submitting the commission, there was nothing else to do. Bennett had already rushed off to the blacksmith to ask Wagner to craft 4-star weapons. With the Northlander billet he brought along, plus some crystal ores and miscellaneous materials at most, along with the crafting costs, it shouldn't be too expensive. Lumen, Nolan, let's go back too. Look at your clothes, all tattered. Let's go back and change, and also I suddenly feel like eating cream cake. Paimon watched a small child walk by on the street holding a cake, and found herself tempted as well. Lumen lowered her head and glanced at the slit in the skirt of her dress, revealing a glimpse of her snowy white skin underneath. She could only nod helplessly. This dress was what she had been wearing all along, and she was reluctant to part with it. She could only go back and repair it with her own excellent skills. Nolan bid farewell to Fiscal and Catherine. Just as he was about to follow Lumen and Paimon back, Nolan suddenly felt his coat being tugged. What's wrong? Nolan turned around and asked Fiscal, who seemed hesitant to speak. You darn attendant, didn't you promise to tell me how to get the Eye of Judgment? Fiscal's hands were on her hips, and the discontent in her uncovered right eye stared at him. So that's it. He hadn't expected Fiscal to be so concerned about this. But then again, it made sense. After all, her claim of possessing the Eye of Judgment was just her fantasy. The black eye patch over her left eye was just a decoration and couldn't possibly seal any power. She understood all this, so it was only natural for her to be very interested when she saw Nolan possessing what she considered her favorite imaginary ability. Thinking this, Nolan decided to satisfy the girl's curiosity. His pitch-black pupils slowly took on a golden hue, like a calm lake bathed in the sunset, reflecting the slightly surprised demeanor of the girl before him. Before I tell you how I awakened this ability, would you like to see if there's any difference between mine and the genuine one belonging to Her Royal Highness? Nolan thought for a moment before saying. Well, that's fine. Fiscal nodded, dropped her hands from her hips, and took 2 steps forward, her legs clad in asymmetric black stockings. She leaned forward slightly, carefully observing his eyes. At close range, the warm breath and gentle fragrance of the girl blew onto Nolan's face together. His gaze lowered slightly, looking at Fiscal's soft, rosy lips, then leaned forward slightly and pressed against them, warmth transferring from the small contact area. Soft and moist, with a hint of sweetness. The girl clearly hadn't expected this to happen, and for a moment, she froze, then a blush quickly spread across her fair face. Fiscal quickly took 2 steps back, wiped her lips, and stared at Nolan with wide eyes, stuttering with embarrassment. You idiot, What are you doing? I told you, this ability of mine is actually a gift from Her Royal Highness, from that time we kissed in the cave, so seeing your curiosity, I thought I'd demonstrate it again. Nolan said with a smile. But you could have just said it directly, why did you have to kiss me? As Fiscal spoke with her lips parted, she could still feel the pressure of their lips touching, unlike last time, her heart was beating so fast, it felt strange. After all, practice makes perfect, right? Since you also want to awaken the Eye of Judgment, this was the only method I could think of. Nolan was using an excuse, he actually wanted to kiss Fiscal again a long time ago. After all, after kissing Fiscal last time, he still wanted to do it again. Why you, how dare you, to offend me, the P-Princess like this, I won't let you off. Fiscal tried to cover up her inner turmoil with threatening words. Even a fool could see that this guy was just fooling around with her. That kiss just now was obviously planned. How despicable. Damn it. Last time, she could console herself with the emergency situation, but now she was directly confronted with it. Sure enough, being kissed by him meant that they would become lovers, right? If he's the one. Ugh. Thinking of this, Fiscal quickly stopped her chaotic thoughts, took a deep breath to calm herself, and glared at Nolan. Even if you become this princess's lover, your status will always be that of an attendant. With that said, Fiscal didn't give Nolan a chance to retort and just snorted, then turned and ran off with her legs wrapped in black semi-transparent stockings. Nolan stared at Fiscal's retreating figure for a moment, slightly dazed. According to what she said just now, does it mean that in the future, besides the relationship of attendant, there will also be the relationship of lovers? This development is a bit unexpectedly fast. However, her affection for him is already max, so this kind of transformation is actually just a matter of a small opportunity. Looking at it this way, it's reasonable. Forget it, let's not think about this matter for now, let's let Fiscal calm down first in a few days. Nolan scratched his head and then followed Lumen and Paimon, who had already walked away. Oh my, it seems that little Fiscal has reached the age to fall in love. Catherine, who had been watching the whole time, couldn't help but cover her mouth and smile like a lady. What were you talking about with Fiscal? Why are you so slow? Paimon looked at Nolan, who was slowly catching up, with a puzzled expression. She's a little curious about my golden eyes and just wanted to take a look. Nolan smiled in response. Talking about kissing Fiscal with another girl was something he couldn't bring himself to do. By the way, let's go buy some ingredients to make cake later, after all, Paimon has contributed a lot in this adventure and promised to make her some delicious treats. Lumen's white thighs swayed alternately under her dress as she swung her high-heeled over-the-knee boots on the stone ground, emitting a faint sound. She turned her head to look at Nolan. That's no problem. Nolan was naturally willing, and at this moment, he saw a series of messages popping up on his character panel. This adventure journey was so amazing, you destroyed pack of rift wolves encroaching on the world's borders to summon the Golden Wolf Lord, and also passed the Northwind Wolf King's trial with your companions. The history you have experienced and created will be remembered, and your character specialty is forming. Please wait. The memory scenes from accepting the commission 2 days ago appeared in Nolan's mind, finally freezing on the scene where they separated from each other. You have gained a new character specialty, Northwind. Nolan slightly clicked on this specialty to look at its effects, and was surprised to find that it was able to allow his attacks to penetrate elemental shields with a small probability. Chapter 161, Eula's Return. Nolan was all too familiar with the aggravation of dealing with elemental shields or barriers. Especially when facing abyss mages, the advantage of his new specialization was immense. These enemies had frail bodies and relied entirely on their elemental shields for defense. Without their shields, they were as vulnerable as ordinary humans, easily susceptible to lethal damage. Of course, their shields were correspondingly strong. But now, with his new specialization, Northwind, Nolan had a small chance for his attacks to penetrate these elemental shields and barriers, directly striking the body. This specialization was incredibly practical, albeit somewhat unreliable due to its low probability. He couldn't rely on it to work every time, as its effectiveness depended on luck. However, with enough attacks, it would eventually activate, ensuring he wouldn't be helpless against such defenses. Even though he now possessed a pyro delusion, as well as the wind elemental power that he had mastered through his specialties, he could basically deal with most of the elemental shields. When he encountered a more stable geo-elemental shield, he could also prepare a heavy weapon to break it. However, none of these were as good as Northwind. After all, those mentioned above required a process of utilizing elemental reactions to take down the shield. The stronger the enemy was, the thicker their elemental shield was, and it might take a long time to break it, all while enduring enemy counterattacks. It's very dangerous. The Northwind's specialty, he didn't need to worry about this at all. He could stay at a distance, firing arrow after arrow. As long as one arrow hit, the creature hiding behind the elemental shield would be injured. Even if it didn't kill them, it would significantly impact their subsequent performance, providing Nolan with a substantial advantage. This specialty offered solid reliability. Nolan, Lumen, and Paimon went into a Mondstadt's department store on the street and purchased some cream, eggs, flour and other ingredients for making cakes. After returning home, the girls excitedly began to prepare the cake, while Nolan lay on the light blue sofa and looked at the character panel. Adventure EXP, 7760. These Adventure EXP were accumulated while battling the Rift monsters with Lumen. According to his prior plan, he aimed to upgrade his swordsmanship level, hoping to unlock another secret art level skill. Experience points -4499. Rhine One-Handed Swordsmanship LV.1, 1/100, Rhine One-Handed Swordsmanship LV.10, Charge/Ready to Fuse. The exceptional characteristic of charge allowed him to build momentum while executing sword techniques, unleashing an incredibly swift and powerful strike. According to the knowledge that surfaced in his mind, this strike could cut through steel without causing significant damage to the sword itself. This was an extraordinary characteristic that greatly enhanced the power of his swordsmanship. Nolan attempted to fuse it with the Favonius Royal Swordsmanship, but unfortunately, the new skill did not evolve into a secret art level technique. Royal One-Handed Swordsmanship LV.10, Flickering Candlelight, Wind Stillness, Charge. It seemed to have only gained an additional extraordinary characteristic, with not much change in name. However, the power had indeed increased. It felt as though an ordinary person, not particularly powerful, possessing such a level of swordsmanship could traverse most wild areas unimpeded. With over 3,200 Adventure EXP left, Nolan decided not to hoard them and immediately invested 3,000 EXP into his level. As a warm current surged within his body, it didn't take long for him to complete another round of enhancement, reaching level 31. Just as he felt pleased with this level up. Crash! Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass and a girl's startled cry echoed through the room. A shard of glass flew towards Nolan. His reflexes quick, he caught it, then sat up and looked towards the two preparing the cake at the table. What happened? Nolan asked Lumen and Paimon, puzzled. I accidentally used too much force, Lumen said, dispelling the vortex of wind elemental energy from her hand. She wiped foam from her face with the back of her pale hand, looking slightly embarrassed. You wouldn't use the wind element to whip egg whites, would you? Nolan knew that making a cake required beating egg whites into a fine foam, a somewhat tedious task. He hadn't expected Lumen to come up with the clever idea of using swirling wind elements for the task, only to misjudge the strength and shatter the bowl. Ugh! Traveler, you idiot! Foam got all over me. Paimon fumed, hands on her hips. Haha! Lumen wiped the white foam from her chest, imitating a certain playful bard by sticking out her pink tongue in a cute attempt to get away with it. Let me help you clean up, Nolan said with a smile. Due to her lack of experience, Lumen ended up covered in egg white foam. It took them the entire afternoon, but they finally managed to make a barely passable cream cake. In the early morning, brilliant sunlight streamed through the window, casting its glow on Nolan. Though he had awakened, he lingered in bed for another half hour before finally getting up. By then, Lumen and Paimon had already prepared breakfast. He stretched in the front yard, squinting and yawning. As he opened his eyes, he saw two figures outside the wrought iron gate, waving at him. It was Amber, her long brown hair tied with a bunny ear ribbon, and Eula, whom he hadn't seen in a while, dressed as always in her form-fitting leather suit and over-the-knee black high-heeled boots. Amber, Eula, what brings you here? Nolan walked over, opened the gate, and invited them in. Good morning, Nolan. I'm here to deliver your flight license, and Eula, well, she insists on testing your swordsmanship or something, Amber said, placing her hands on her soft waist, a smile lighting up her fair face. He did recall Grandmaster Jean mentioning that the reconnaissance squad would return for a break, so it wasn't surprising that Eula, the squad leader, would come back. However, he thought Jean would assign her to clear the rift monsters in Wolvendom. Since it was an urgent mission, they would have at most half a day to resupply before heading out. He didn't expect Eula to skip resting and come over to test his swordsmanship. Her dedication touched him deeply. Fortunately, his skills had reached an impressive level, not disappointing her. Mentorship. Humph, I just wanted to see if you've been slacking off. If you have, I'll hold a grudge. Eula said, crossing her arms and lightly pressing them against the light blue, gold-patterned tie that draped over the center of her leather suit, accentuating her figure. Of course, my swordsmanship will absolutely surprise you, Nolan replied with a smile. All right, let's hold off on the swordsmanship test for now. I'll give you your flight licenses and relay Master Jean's instructions, then I need to get to work, Amber said, taking 2 booklets from her vision and handing them to him. As Nolan accepted the flight licenses, he noticed the additional message in her words, "Is there something Grand Master Jean needs us for?" Chapter 162, Eula's Swordsmanship Lesson. Actually, there's nothing much, just a request to return the Holy Lyre to Himmel to the cathedral, Amber said with a smile, her white thighs exposed under her brown leather shorts. The Holy Lyre to Himmel? Hasn't Venti returned it yet? All right, we'll go find him, Nolan replied after a moment's thought. That unreliable bard is probably passed out drunk somewhere, having completely forgotten about it. Please take care of that. I have to get back to work, Amber said, nodding with her hands on her hips. She turned on her heel, her legs elegantly wrapped in over-the-knee white boots, and headed out the door. By the way, have you had breakfast? Would you like to join us? Nolan asked Eula. Since you're so insistent, I'll reluctantly accept your invitation, Eula replied, raising her fair chin in a haughty manner. The two of them walked from the front yard into the living room. Lumen, dressed in a sleeveless tank top that revealed her pale arms, and Paimon were sitting at the dining table, sipping porridge. Hey, who are you? Paimon asked, licking a grain of rice from the corner of her mouth as she eyed the tall, curvaceous woman following Nolan with some confusion. Lumen, her cheeks puffed out as she drank her porridge, also looked curiously at the newcomer with her amber eyes. This is Eula, the captain of the reconnaissance squad I mentioned before, and the true owner of this house, Nolan explained with a smile. Wow, you're the wealthy landlord. Paimon's starry eyes seemed to sparkle as she flew up to Eula. Ahem. Amber mentioned you too. The traveler who drove away Storm Terror and her good companion, Eula said, slightly uncomfortable under Paimon's intense gaze, lightly coughing into her fist and averting her eyes. Hee, that's us. I'll get you some porridge, Paimon said eagerly, causing Lumen to facepalm in exasperation. After finishing breakfast, Eula led Nolan to the backyard for a swordsmanship lesson. Lumen, the blonde girl, sat on the veranda with her pale arms wrapped around her knees, watching curiously as a spectator. Paimon, meanwhile, hovered above her head. A gentle breeze rustled Eula's single-shoulder cape that draped over her white back. She pulled out 2 wooden training swords from her vision, tossing one to Nolan with a smile. Come on, show me what you've got. She challenged. Nolan caught the spinning wooden sword by the hilt with one hand and faced Eula. Eula-sensei, here I come. He declared, lowering his center of gravity. The wooden sword aligned with his shoulder, his toes digging into the ground. In an instant, he closed the distance between them, the surrounding scenery blurring in his peripheral vision. The wooden sword sliced through the air, aiming for Eula's abdomen, where she had deliberately left an opening. Nolan could tell she was confident, and he wouldn't hold back either. Oh? Such speed! You've improved a lot since last time. Eula's fair face showed a hint of surprise. She twisted her wrist, meeting his strike with the tip of her own wooden sword. Thud! The 2 wooden swords clashed with a dull sound. Eula seized the brief moment of impact to lift her sword, sweeping the blade towards Nolan's face. Eula wasn't pulling any punches. Even though they were using wooden swords, a hit from this strike would make his teeth ache for days. Nolan leaned back to dodge the tip of her sword, then swiftly countered with an upward strike aimed at her waist, tightly encased in her form-fitting outfit. Not bad. Eula remarked with a light laugh. She stepped forward, her waist brushing against his arm. With a quick, fluid motion, she spun, her body following the curve of his elbow like a dancer twirling under her partner's arm. The soft sensation against his arm made Nolan hesitate for a split second. Before he could react, he found his face pressed into the soft fabric of her abdomen, his nose just touching her navel. The sheer black material over it blocked his nostrils, making it hard to breathe. As he tried to slide down to escape, he felt a hand press against the back of his head, pushing him deeper into her midriff. At the same time, Eula circled behind Nolan, placing the wooden training sword against the right side of his neck. She smiled, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "Incredible," she said. "Your swordsmanship is nearly on par with mine. If it weren't for my superior strength and physical abilities, I wouldn't have been able to overpower you." "Ugh." Nolan conceded, lowering his wooden sword and tapping the side of her white thigh encased in black over the knee boots, signaling her to release him. "My apologies." Eula retracted the sword and let go, laughing lightly. "Well, as expected of the guerrilla captain," Nolan remarked, standing up and stretching his slightly sore neck. "I didn't expect you to be taken down so quickly." "I was hoping to see an exciting duel," Paimon said from the veranda, spreading her hands in disappointment. "Exactly," Lumen agreed, nodding emphatically. "You too, if you're so disappointed, why don't you give it a try?" Nolan suggested, looking at them helplessly. Traveler, how about sparring with me for a bit?" Eula extended a hand to Lumen. "Bring it on, we won't lose," Paimon said with her hands on her hips, full of fighting spirit. She then looked at Lumen. "Right, Traveler?" Lumen thought for a moment before nodding. "Okay, I want to see how far I am from Eula's level." Lumen, being stronger than Nolan, held her ground against Eula for a while but was ultimately defeated. This outcome was expected, as Lumen had lost most of her power and was currently only at level 40. Losing to Eula was understandable. However, Lumen's rapid growth meant that surpassing Eula was only a matter of time. "Eula, do you have time later?" Nolan asked, watching Eula as she took a short break. "I'm free all morning." "Why do you ask?" Eula responded, crossing her arms and slightly lifting her chest encased in the semi-sheer black fabric, a puzzled expression on her fair face. Nolan explained their need to return the Holy Lyre to Himmel to Mondstadt Cathedral, expressing his concern about the Fatui causing trouble again. He wanted Eula's support. In the game's storyline, Venti was attacked by La Signora right after returning the Holy Lyre to Himmel. Though uncertain if the same event would occur, the Fatui's goal was the Gnosis, and they would inevitably target Venti. Nolan wanted a strong ally to ensure they could resist any potential threat. "I see. Since you've been diligent in practicing your swordsmanship, I'll accompany you," Eula said, raising her fair face slightly, her tone a bit haughty. "Eula has developed good feelings towards you. Obtain 300 affection points. Current affection level LV.4, 25/400. Chapter 163, Clues of a Relative. In Mondstadt City, at the Angel's Share Tavern. Before returning the Holy Lyre to Himmel, they first needed to find Venti, as the harp was in his possession. Typically, to find the elusive Venti, one would try their luck at the tavern. After all, he needed Mora to buy his beloved wine. As a bard, he would naturally be at the tavern, where telling stories would draw a crowd and good business. Unfortunately, it was still early, and the tavern wasn't crowded. They couldn't find Venti. Just as they were about to leave, the bartender, Charles, called out to them. "Wait a moment, everyone. The master would like to see you upstairs." "Master Diluc? Why does he want to see us?" Paimon tilted her head, surprised. "I'm not sure," Charles replied, shaking his head slightly. "All right, let's see what Diluc wants," Lumen nodded, agreeing. Nolan, Lumen, Paimon and Eula ascended to the tavern's second floor, where they saw Diluc, clad in a black coat, sitting at a table. "Hey, Master Diluc, we meet again," Paimon greeted him. "I overheard that you're looking for the bard." Diluc asked after a moment of contemplation. "Yes, that's right. Do you know where he is?" Nolan responded. "On my way to the tavern earlier, I passed Fountain Plaza. Some children there mentioned a man in green telling stories near the Enmo Archon statue. I suspect that's him," Diluc explained calmly, crossing his legs under the table. "So, Master Diluc called us up here just to tell us this." "Hehe, that means we don't have to search for him all over the place," Paimon said excitedly. "Besides that, there's something else I want to ask you," Diluc said, directing his gaze toward Nolan and Lumen. "To be honest, I've been investigating you two in private. Investigating us? Lumen's fair face showed a puzzled expression. Given your unknown origins and considerable strength, it was quite suspicious. So, investigating you is a reasonable action, Diluc said calmly. Wait a minute, we're not bad people. Even if you took us to the Knights, Master Jean would release us immediately, Paimon retorted, hands on her hips, glaring at Diluc. Amber told me they're from another world, so there's no need to dig any deeper, Eula said, crossing her arms beneath her chest, her gaze sharp as she looked at Diluc. She had been surprised when Amber mentioned this yesterday, but since Nolan was her friend and she felt no animosity from Lumen, Eula valued them both despite her often tough exterior. So, even though she understood Diluc's actions were justified, she couldn't help but feel a bit defensive of her friends being under suspicion. Diluc glanced at the eldest daughter of the Lawrence family, whose strength might rival his own and who sometimes displayed a surprising naivety. Then he spoke again, I know, but that's not what I want to discuss right now. Then what do you mean? Eula asked, brushing an icy blue strand of hair aside. Ignoring her question, Diluc shifted his focus to Lumen. I heard you're looking for your brother. During my investigation, I captured an abyss mage who said you resemble their leader, the prince. What? Hearing this, Lumen's amber eyes widened in shock. Paimon, floating beside her, was equally stunned. Nolan felt a wave of surprise. His presence had clearly altered events slightly. Lumen had received information about her brother shortly after arriving in Mondstadt, something that took much longer in the game's storyline. This was undoubtedly a positive turn of events. Nolan had already stretched the limits by revealing his otherworldly origins. If he had gone further to claim knowledge of the world's future events, it would have certainly aroused suspicion from everyone. After all, if you know about me and then want to get close to me, it's obvious they have some ulterior motive. That immediately labels them as suspicious. In such a situation, earning anyone's affection becomes extremely difficult. Therefore, unless it's a dire situation where someone important is in danger, it's best to stay hidden as much as possible. Even for something like returning the lyre, I needed a good reason to ask Eula for help. I couldn't just say, I know the Fatui will attack, please help me. Or something like that. That would sound foolish. As they left the tavern and headed towards the Enmo Archon statue plaza, Lumen was deep in thought. While Diluc had said it was just a guess, and that the Abyss Mage might have mistaken someone who looked like her brother for their prince, she couldn't shake the unease. Lumen believed her brother wouldn't lead a malevolent organization, but 500 years had passed since he was taken by the god. What he had gone through during that time, and whether it would have changed his character, no one knew. Lumen, are you okay? Paimon asked, worried as she hovered close to the traveler. I'm fine. I'm just a bit surprised. It seems we need to keep an eye on the Abyss Order during our journey, Lumen said, shaking her head slightly, her golden hair shimmering with emotion. In that case, if I encounter the Abyss Order in the wild, I'll capture some of them and interrogate them to see if their leader is indeed your brother, Eula said reassuringly, her curvy legs clad in black over-the-knee heeled boots. Thank you, Eula. Lumen forced a smile onto her fair face. In a somewhat somber silence, it took them a while to finally reach the plaza of the Enmo Archon statue. Sure enough, they spotted Venti playing the lyre and telling what seemed to be fairy tales to a group of children. Hey, traveler! We meet again. Are you looking for me? Venti asked curiously as he saw them approach. Yes, Venti. Acting Grand Master Jean is urging us to return the Holy Lyre to Himmel to the cathedral. Do you still need it for anything? Lumen explained, having regained her composure. Oh, so that's what it's about, Venti said, clapping his hands as if in sudden realization. I was hoping to keep my old friend for a bit longer, but I understand. All right, he added, a touch of regret in his voice. Chapter 164, The Chill of Frost approaches. Goodbye, Bard brother. Next time, you must tell us more stories. The children dispersed tactfully, knowing Venti had other matters to attend to. Haha, no problem. Venti waved his hand towards them. Paimon feels a bit sorry for you, selling your music like this. After all, the lyre is originally yours, yet now you have to return it to the cathedral, Paimon said, spreading her hands in mild sympathy. True, but I abandoned it for so many years. The people of Mondstadt took good care of it during that time. Taking it back now would be rather shameless, Venti said, scratching the back of his head with a touch of embarrassment. Venti, did you switch personalities or something? Since when did you think you had any shame? Lumen crossed her arms over her midriff, the long white sleeves of her outfit revealing glimpses of her soft, fair skin through slits at the elbows. She looked at the young bard with disdain. Ah, traveler, your words wound me deeply. Venti clutched his heart in mock sorrow. I did help resolve the crisis in Mondstadt, you know. Who was the one who came up with the plan to steal the holy harp in the first place? As a god, was such behavior appropriate? Nolan thought to himself. Eula rested her finger on her chin, gazing at the bard with some disbelief. Could this guy really be Lord Barbatos? Then why doesn't he look like him? Well, let's not waste any time. Let's return the holy lyre to Himmel first, Nolan reminded everyone. Walking from the Enmo Archon statue plaza, they soon reached the open main door of Mondstadt Cathedral. Nuns were bustling in and out. Ah, it's the honorary knights. Are you here for the rooftop cleaning commission? A nun approached, looking at the group with hopeful eyes. No, we're not here for the commission. We're here to return the holy lyre to Himmel, Nolan explained, shaking his head slightly. Oh, I see. Miss Barbara is inside. You can give it to her, the nun said, slightly disappointed. She sighed inwardly, wondering why no one had accepted the cleaning commission yet. Thank you, Nolan replied with a smile and nodded. The group then walked into the inside cathedral. It wasn't difficult to spot a girl cleaning the floor ahead. She wore the priestess hat of the Church of Favonius, her light golden hair styled into wavy twin tails. She was dressed in a black and blue trimmed white dress, her legs covered in white silk tights, and she wore round-toed boots with large cuffs. Humming a tune as she cleaned, she radiated a sunny disposition. Without a doubt, this was Barbara. Nolan thought secretly. Hello, Barbara, Eula greeted as she walked over, her pale, shapely legs carrying her gracefully across the floor. Eula knew Barbara, so it was fitting for her to initiate the conversation. Oh, it's Sister Eula. Have you returned from your mission in the wild? Barbara's face lit up with excitement upon seeing Eula. Eula, much like Barbara's older sister, was a respected member of the Knights of Favonius, and Barbara held her in high regard. Yes, I'll be heading out again in the afternoon, Eula replied, lifting her chest slightly before looking at the others behind her. By the way, they are here to return the holy lyre to Himmel. Hi there, Miss Barbara, Paimon waved cheerfully. Ah, you must be the honorary knights. I'm Barbara, the deaconess of the Church of Favonius, Barbara said, smiling and placing her hands over the large bow on her chest. Paimon, Lumen, Nolan, and Venti all introduced themselves politely. The storm ended several days ago, but you hadn't returned the borrowed holy lyre to Himmel. I thought you might have forgotten, so I mentioned it to my sister, Barbara said, her white hands clasped together nervously as she rubbed them, looking slightly embarrassed. Oh, so it was you who told the acting Grand Master. That's why Amber came to remind us, Paimon said, nodding in understanding. Then, her eyes widened in realization. Wait, the acting Grand Master is your sister? Yes, Barbara responded softly. All right, time to finish up the introductions. Hand over the holy lyre to Himmel to Barbara, Eula said, her lips curling slightly as she spoke. Hehe, here it is, the holy lyre to Himmel, Venti said with a smile, presenting the now brilliantly shining harp to Barbara. Wait, it looks a bit different, doesn't it? Barbara asked in disbelief as she took the lyre, noticing its rejuvenated appearance. It was restored with the tears of the storm dragon, Lumen explained simply. Thanks to their careful handling, the holy lyre to Himmel hadn't suffered any damage like in the game's storyline and had even been repaired. The bright sunlight streaming through the windows fell on Barbara's legs, covered in white tights, as she exclaimed in realization, oh, I see. That means it can play even more healing music now. Thank you so much. Barbara hugged the harp and bowed slightly to express her gratitude. Barbara has good feelings towards you, obtain 260 affection points. Current affection level, LV.2, 160/200. You're welcome. It's only right to take good care of borrowed items, Paimon said with a smile. If there's nothing else, I'll go put the holy lyre back in its place, Barbara said, carefully cradling the lyre as she left. Well, that went smoothly. Let's go, Venti said, stretching lazily. As he headed towards the exit, he glanced at Lumen. Traveler, you probably have many questions for me. Now's a good time to ask. The blonde girl paused for a moment before nodding gently. Yes, do you know the god who took my brother? She described the appearance of the female god briefly. Well, Venti fell silent for a while, still deep in thought as they stepped out of the cathedral. I'm afraid I don't recognize her. You'll have to. Before he could finish his sentence, a wave of frost surged from the ground, quickly encasing everyone's legs in ice, except for Paimon of course. What? What's happening? Paimon shouted, looking in the direction the frost came from. A woman in a black and white dress, wearing high heels, walked towards them with elegant strides, her long, snow-white legs moving gracefully. Chapter 165, Gnosis. Humph, what a weakling. Signora's arrogant gaze swept over the group before settling on the young poet. Granted divine powers by the Queen of Ice, she could freeze even another god for a short time, especially one like the Enmo Archon, who neither governed a nation nor performed his divine duties and thus had little divine power. So, this Fatui Harbinger finally appeared. With so many Fatui agents lurking in Mondstadt, finding Venti, who wandered around the city all day, was hardly difficult. Nolan struggled against the ice encasing his legs, but it was like trying to break free from steel, utterly immobile. Seeing the lady advancing toward Venti, he frowned and asked Eula and Lumen, she seems to have some plan for Venti. Can you stop her? Damn it, I can't move either. Lumen channeled the wind element to break the ice around her legs, but to no avail. I need a bit more time. Eula's legs, clad in black over-the-knee high-heeled boots, were also frozen, but her familiarity with the ice element and her formidable physical strength allowed her to create a small crack through sheer force. Nolan summoned a fireball using his delusion's fire element, directing it at the ice around Eula's legs to speed up the melting process. Humph! Seeing this, Signora stopped her leisurely approach. Her white legs tensed as she broke through the air, appearing in front of Venti in an instant. In his surprised gaze, her black-gloved hand plunged into his abdomen. Just as in the game's storyline, Venti offered no resistance, despite having been warned long ago. Ah, the bard! Paimon gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Nolan quickly drew his adventurer's hunter bow, knocked an arrow infused with fire element, and aimed it at the lady's head. Signora noticed Nolan's action, smirked coldly, and swiftly withdrew her hand, now holding a chess piece-like object Venti's Gnosis. Nolan released the arrow, sending the fire-infused projectile hurtling toward Signora. She nonchalantly raised her hand, conjuring an ice shield in its path. However, to her surprise, the arrow seemed to teleport past the shield, appearing instantly before the black lace mask on her forehead. The impact, though dampened by the mask, delivered a significant jolt. The fire element burst forth but was quickly extinguished by her ice manipulation, though it still singed a few strands of her golden hair. Damn, that's one tough mask. In Nolan's golden eyes of judgment, the lady was undoubtedly another being whose level he couldn't discern. Even hitting a weak point seemed to have minimal effect. Bastard! Signora had never imagined that she, the powerful lady, would be injured by such a weak adversary. Anger flared, threatening to unleash her true form as the Crimson Witch. Fiery red butterflies of infernal fire flickered into existence around her before vanishing again. Fortunately, the power granted by the Queen of Ice allowed her to regain control. Now was not the time for reckless behavior. With the Gnosis in hand, it was time to leave. Signora glared fiercely at Nolan. Very well, I will remember you. Signora has negative feelings towards you, obtained -200 affection points, current affection level LV.1, 200/100. Nolan looked at the notification that popped up on the character panel, and felt a slight headache. Being marked by the lady meant she might eliminate him the next time they crossed paths. Humph, no one can lay a hand on my vengeance target before I complete my revenge. Eula shattered the ice around her legs and summoned a blue greatsword with golden edges. She charged at Signora with determined grace. The frost-covered blade swirled with her elegant movement, descending upon the enemy from above. Signora raised her hand, forming an ice shield to protect herself. Facing a captain-level member of the Knights of Favonius, she wasn't going to take another blow head-on. As the sword clashed with the shield, a burst of icy energy exploded between them. Not far behind, Paimon was instantly blown away by the blast. Lumen reacted quickly, catching her mid-air, while Nolan shielded his face from the debris. Crack! The ice shield began to fracture. Sensing trouble, Signora stomped her high-heeled foot on the ground. A massive ice spike shot up towards Eula's soft abdomen, clad in semi-transparent black stockings. She swung her great sword down, blocking the sharp tip of the spike. Using the momentum, Eula twisted gracefully in mid-air, bringing her blue great sword with golden edges down on her enemy once more. Signora furrowed her brow, quickly forming a triple-layered ice shield while leaping back a few steps. The sword sliced through the ice shields effortlessly, continuing its path until it struck the ground, carving a crack in the stone that stretched all the way to Signora's feet. Eula straightened her posture and locked eyes with Signora. In her hand appeared a pure white, incomplete great sword, the Lightfall sword. This sword, formed from solid ice, would grow more complete over time, eventually unleashing a massive physical shockwave. Impressive strength. Signora recognized the danger of the floating white sword near Eula and decided she didn't want to prolong the fight. She smirked before her body slowly dissolved into frost, vanishing from the spot. Humph, I'll remember this grudge. Eula stared at the empty space where Signora had been, dispersing the Lightfall sword with a wave, her frustration evident. Venti, are you okay? Paimon asked, flying over to support the weakened bard who was struggling to stand. Cough, I'm fine, just a bit of a stomachache, Venti replied, seemingly unbothered. Though Signora had plunged her hand into his abdomen, there was no visible wound. Nolan and Lumen spent some time melting the ice around their legs and hurried over to help Venti, checking for injuries. Confused, Nolan asked, aren't you the Enmo Archon? Even at your weakest, you should have had some resistance. Why did you let her attack you? And what did she take from you? Lumen and the others shared the same question. Sigh, she took my gnosis, Venti admitted, clutching his stomach in discomfort. I don't know why the Tsaritsa ordered the Fatui Harbingers to steal it, but it was better to let it go. If they need it, they can have it, rather than causing more chaos in Mondstadt trying to get it.
Thanks for listening.